What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Metal Maniacs Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Ingersoll, and I'm here with that sweet child of mine.
What's up, Jay? It's your boy, Modd.
What's up, buddy?
What's up, Dad?
And today, we have a very interesting episode. So I asked a couple of our good friends to do some work for us, which I don't normally like to do, especially these guys got enough work to do. But I think Jeremy just wanted to come on because now this makes 4 times, so he's still the reigning champion of times on the Metal Maniacs Podcast, and we appreciate that. So from what are you all doing now? Jeremy McClarey. Tell us what you're doing, because you're doing different stuff now since the last time you've been on the show.
Yeah, definitely. So first off, thanks for having me back on. I love being here. I've missed you guys. So, it's just been too long. So we had to get together again.
Yeah.
Plus I get to hang out with my good buddy Luke. So that'll be fun. So I was on here quite a bit for Pain Divine, but Pain Divine has since dissolved. We just kind of called it a day. It just, sometimes that shit happens. So we called it a day. I'm still ripping in a band called Tunnel of Love, TOL, doing a little bit like fast hardcore power violence stuff, and little snake out, little rock and roll.
Yeah.
So still active. But yeah, just living life.
And then what about the pod?
So I'm also I've got another podcast, a different podcast called Fireside Chants. We talk to people on there. We've had some cool guests on. We've talked to guys from the Red Corps. We've talked to guys from Nails.
Nice.
Full of Hell, a couple different bands. So yeah, it's been a good time over there with my buddy Eric.
Hell
Lo-fi horror guy. Shout out.
Yeah, hell yeah. So Jeremy McClarey, thanks for coming on the show. And Luke, he's back for like two in a row now. This makes
it's becoming like a Sunday tradition.
Yeah, no kidding.
Is Luke tied with Jeremy for 4 appearances? Because we just had him on for Reinventing. He was on prior to that.
This is his third.
Just the third?
Yeah, we just talk about him on every show.
Yeah, but I get mentioned more than Jeremy.
For sure.
It's all right. That's how it goes.
Maybe I'll have to step up my
I
Jeremy
do the work,
McClarey
he gets the cred.
mentions. Yeah.
Well, with all that being said, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having
Today's
us.
show, if you can't tell by the title, is we're going to do a deep dive into hardcore. So when I say that, I felt like I didn't really have a room to talk on this because this is a genre that I'm not super familiar with, and I got my journey started with the genre of basically metal, right? Yeah. And then when you try to go into hardcore, it's a different deviation. It's almost kind of a step back when you hear all this crazy heavy shit. And so I didn't get the trajectory of like a lot of hardcore kids, right? So I don't feel like I was able to speak on this, and I wanted to get you guys because I know you're both versed in it. And also with the whole hardcore thing, it's like I like a handful of bands, but I would hope that you can expose me to more and our audience to more, because I know a lot of people in our audience like hardcore as well. So I just wanted to get you guys on. I appreciate you putting all the work and time into it. I know you're both busy, but I thought it'd just be a cool idea for an episode and have you guys educate us.
Oh yeah. We've been excited about it. I mean, we've been talking about it, going back and forth. We met up and talked about it over some coffee. And so this is
cigarettes.
Jeremy was smoking squares.
No, just say no to tobacco, kids. No, I'm just losing my voice a little bit. I'm not sick either. These guys are safe. They're safe.
Thanks for letting everybody know that.
Good. Yep.
There will be another episode after this.
So I mean, part of the conversation, I think, when it comes to like metal and the role and like where does hardcore lie in there is, one thing that, Luke and I already said, right? I mean, when we came in today, it's like, well, what is a differentiator? Like, what's the difference between metal and hardcore? So, for me, when I think of metal, it's obviously fast. Well, hardcore is also fast.
Yeah.
I think about it's kind of a underground extreme music. Well, so is hardcore. So really, to me, it can come down to like an attitude.
Ethics.
Yeah, like the ethos of hardcore maybe versus the
Content.
ethos of metal.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to what is the priority. Right?
True.
Like what are we focused on here? I think in metal sometimes it's a little you're more likely, if you're going to record a hardcore band, we might just do it live.
Yeah, live recording.
But like a metal band, we're almost certainly going to have a click, right?
Yep.
A metronome, like it's going to be precise. It's going to be
Precision,
boom, boom, boom.
technical.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in hardcore, like there's less of that emphasis.
Sure.
It's more about an energy and a performance, or like the actual overall performance than the actual technicality of playing the instrument, basically, is what you're alluding to.
Yeah,
correct?
more of like a primal feeling
Yes.
than technicality.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and not to say, I mean, and that's where this starts to get complicated, because that's not to say that there's not aggression or energy or emotion in metal,
Right.
and that's not to say there's not technicality in hardcore, but
Sure.
when you get into these subgenres and you start to break things down, that's when you get into some of this like weird territory, right? Where it's like, well, there's no rules. I mean,
Right.
people are just doing the shit that makes sense to them. So that's the other part of it, right? We're going to talk about this like there's like some kind of maybe rule book, but there is no rule book, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
Yeah, gatekeepers like to think there is one,
Oh, they sure
so
do.
some of the-
They sure do.
when I started getting exposed to hardcore, I just thought it was metal that I hadn't heard yet. Like, oh, there's a new branch
Right.
of metal out there that is coming up that nope, this is some East Coast hardcore stuff that's been around forever, and you're not familiar with where these guys are getting their influences. Like Earth Crisis was a big one for me. And when you talk
Same.
about technicality, I thought that was a rather metal-esque kind of a hardcore band. I was like, oh, these guys play. Like they do slightly technical things, or I wasn't used to it. So yeah, and to your point, there's some technicality happening on the other side of the fence, if you will. It's just, it depends from band to band. It's almost circumstantial. So
for sure, and oftentimes, I mean, to be clear, like, and I don't want to speak for Luke, but we are not the end all be all of like we know
Definitely
everything.
not.
We're this is definitive. Like I
Right.
promise you, there's gonna be a million bands we don't mention. There's gonna be a million things we don't mention.
Welcome to
also
our
people
world.
yeah, no
buddy.
doubt.
Yeah. So
Welcome to our
full
every week.
disclaimer. It is both Jay and Nick's fault if that happens, and if your favorite band was
Leave
left
us
off or
alone.
we
Yeah.
misspeak,
Yeah.
it's their fault, and direct the comments to them. So make sure you post away, comment away on how angry you are with them
Yeah.
Please.
about that, because they really, really. That's why they do this, right? They
Yeah.
do this for all the negativity.
For all the
The
negative
abuse.
feedback.
Yeah. I'm a glutton for punishment.
So that kind of, I mean, somebody already said like gatekeepers and things like that. And, like it's hard enough, I think, for metal bands to be metal bands, because it's like people are putting up walls and be like, oh, you're a metal band, but you did this, and so no, you're
No.
poser metal,
Yeah.
or you're not true metal. So
Right.
Not
You
metal
know,
enough.
I brought up how like at Hatebreed shows, there's like, to me, it's interesting because hardcore and metal to me just makes sense that if you're a fan of one, there's a good chance you're gonna be a fan of the other.
Sure.
But that doesn't happen usually.
No.
And usually it's like, no, I hate that shit.
I
Yeah.
hate
that
that
shit.
karate shit.
Yeah. Or like, I hate that push pitch shit. Either side,
Yeah.
both sides do it.
Yeah, there's purists on both sides.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, to me, it's epitomized by, look at that play on words. It's epitomized
pit.
by the pits, like push pits versus like hardcore dancing pits and things like that. And, I've been to plenty of Hatebreed shows, which to me, Hatebreed probably are like the poster child of like a foot in both
The
camp.
blend.
Yeah.
Like there are, I don't know, like you could literally show someone that and be like, oh, they're a metal band. You could
Yeah.
show someone that and be like, they're a hardcore band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
That's to me, in my mind, where things started to blur a lot. So let's just go back just for a second, because I'm playing off this. So just real quick, I want to know what you guys think about this, and I don't want to go back because I know we're progressing along here. But like,
yeah.
so I just like this question. So it's like, what does metal make you think? To me, metal, just right off the bat, is like some melodic, like probably fast, and then like some kind of technical proficiency, but there is a melodicism to it, right? But then
Aggression.
you say like, what does hardcore make you think? To me, that's more like punk, fast, aggressive, but that all stems from like more of a punk in your face type thing.
True.
So that's just what I think when I hear those two terms.
And
sure.
that's
You
kind
know?
of where hardcore came from. It was punk. Like
Yeah.
they just saw punk rock and they were like, "Oh, we love that, but what if we play it harder and
Yep.
faster
Yeah.
and more aggressive?"
And
And that's
then
kind of where
more
the hardcore-
distortion, right?
Yes,
Because
yes.
punk a lot of times could have very, very minimal distortion. correct?
Sometimes, yeah.
But a lot of it too is, I mean, metal, that's what's funny to me is metal and hardcore. There's all these parallels because, okay,
Yeah.
well, was some of the bands in the '70s that were metal bands, were they the most distorted bands? If you listen to Deep Purple, how distorted is that?
No,
Right,
not.
Yeah.
Are they
exactly.
rocking through like a 5150 with like a tube screamer on
Yeah,
there?
that
No.
shit wouldn't even really hurt
You
them
know,
at that time.
So like, and then you go from them to like Bay Area thrash bands,
Yeah.
you know,
DRI and shit.
and that's it's just that that progression of the genre, right?
Yeah.
As time goes on, things change. You don't just do the same thing over and over again. So hardcore is the same way. It's punk, just like there's 70s metal,
Sure.
Yeah.
you know, and then which you could say, well, it's not really metal. It's more like hard rock. or
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah,
But at the time,
Sabbath,
But it's
yeah.
but at the time it's
Yeah.
metal.
It's
And then
heavy, yeah.
moving into the 80s, well, now we have thrash metal and like the technology's changed. We have different amps, and we can have an amp that has like gain staging built into it, and we have this distortion. And then but hardcore, then that's all hardcore came from. It's like, let's take punk to the next step, more aggressive, more extreme, if you will.
Mhm.
And then it just keeps going from there. And you know, just like with, you know, metal, well, Suffocation doesn't sound really anything like Black Sabbath,
Right.
right?
Not at all.
But you don't have Suffocation without Black Sabbath.
Right.
You don't have
Right.
hardcore bands without, you know,
Bad Brains,
Ramones,
Minor Threat.
you know, Minor Threat, like those early, like Black Flag. You know, Black
Yeah,
Flag
sure.
are a hardcore band. They are like they were one of the first hardcore bands, Bad Brains. But those bands, you know, that's not really what we're digging into today, because, you know, when we think about Bad Brains, that's not really what Hatebreed was thinking about when they're writing
No.
stuff.
Sure.
So, you know, it's really that evolution through time, and I don't think it's any different in either genre. I think actually what I think people would see is that there's way more similarities than there are differences when you look at these different genres. And to your point, Nick, if someone hadn't told you that Earth Crisis was a hardcore band,
Right.
you would have just been like, they're a variation on a metal band. They're
Yeah.
just a different kind of metal. Cool.
Yep.
This is cool. And you wouldn't have minded that, and most people wouldn't mind that.
Sure.
But you put the label of hardcore, now it's like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. You mean I like hardcore suddenly?
Oh,
Oops.
I thought I didn't like that.
Right.
Especially when we were exposed on that Ice Fest tape that was like
Yeah.
all metal bands, right?
Yeah, that's why I thought it was a metal band. I was like, well, every other band on here is metal. Slayer, Sepultura, Fear Factory, whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, this is clearly a metal band. And Luke's like, that's hardcore. I hate
Yeah,
to
that
break
was-
it to you, friend.
Yeah, that was kind of one of the first times I was exposed to that.
That and
myself.
Hatebreed.
That was
Yeah.
my first exposure
Yeah.
to hardcore was Earth Crisis. That
That's cool.
video, that exact video.
Pleather and a vegan diet. Let's
Hey,
have it.
are we going kind of in order on this then?
Yeah, and we can go
Okay.
wherever we want to
Okay.
with it, and feel free to jump
Okay.
in, guys, and riff on things.
Sure.
But
I just didn't want to, like, I see you got a section for history, so I'll just wait till we get there because I got a couple things I want to add and also ask. So
yeah, for sure, and we'll dig in. But you know, like I said, you know, there's just that divisiveness for whatever reason.
Mm.
You know, like people not getting into this or getting into that. Do you want to just add into that, Luke, about, you know, the different camps or what your experiences have maybe been with that?
Well, I mean, there's always been that division between hardcore and metal, and I don't understand it personally because I consider myself very open to any genre, and even though I am, you know, pulled to hardcore, like that's kind of where my prime genre lies, I guess. I love it all. You know, I've
Mhm.
never understood that. Like, I don't understand why you can't have like, you know, some death metal purists, I guess, if you would say, like, completely hate anything hardcore. I don't understand that, and I don't understand why some hardcore kids shit on like any metalheads.
Right.
It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, you should be able to coexist. It's basically the same, like you said, ethos of like down to its core. It's basically the same. I don't get it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Especially as the history of both of these genres start to unfold, and they do start to sound more and more alike
Very
at some
similar,
point. You know,
yeah.
there is a convergence, if you will, as time unfolds. So you get an Earth Crisis or a Hatebreed, where again they're hardcore in their roots, but just as easily metal in their roots too. Like, one member's bringing more of the thrash metal to the table, another guy's bringing punk, and they're like, oh, they actually do kind of sound alike, the thrash metal, the punk stuff.
Yeah.
Let's get together and jam and write some stuff. So one guy's coming from one background, another the opposite, but then they get together in the room and they're making music, and it's for both worlds. I think a lot of musicians will adopt either one of the genres just as easily as another musician, but fans for some reason kind of have this divisive attitude about one genre versus the other. But the further we go on in time, the closer these two things sound to each other or blend well together. So I'm excited to hear because where it comes from is where you lose me. But that's just the same for like rock and metal. Like I'm only going so far back.
Yep.
There's quality issues, first of all, just in the recordings, right?
Oh, yes,
across the
definitely.
board, every genre. I get to a point where I'm like, the quality sucks. I can't listen to it. But also in terms of like how actually heavy a band might be, Led Zeppelin's not that heavy.
Yeah.
But at the time, they
At
were
the
pretty
time,
fucking
they were
heavy.
heavy, yeah.
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 So I enjoyed Led Zeppelin, but you go back before that, I'm like, there's really no metal before that.
Yeah.
Like, so
No.
maybe, hard
Ba-
stuff, but yeah.
Back then, I would say like Led Zeppelin was probably like Morbid Angel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't call anything before that metal, and
Yeah.
I use that term as lightly as possible with Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
But they do have some elements there where you could see that the genre would pick up. But yeah, when you go back in time with hardcore, I'm like, well, isn't it just punk?
Yeah,
Like,
and it is. It
Right.
truly
Basically,
is. That's
yeah.
what it was. Right?
Yeah,
So before we get into that, though, real quick, I just want to say, like, now with all of these genres and the lines being so blurred, everything's just everything now. I
True.
can't tell you now if it's a metal, technical, deathcore, hardcore. Like, I don't even know. So I feel like as we keep progressing, these purists, as we get older, and either we adapt and say we're going to enjoy things from every genre like you do, or me, or you, or you,
Mhm.
or you're just going to be a purist and you're going to die off.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
all these young kids that are coming up and they're going to this show that's Knocked Loose and the Black Dahlia murder.
Yeah.
Right.
right.
I mean, what the fuck? That right now, that's the epitome of metal, death metal, and the
Mhm.
epitome of what hardcore is
Yep.
at this point.
Yep.
Am I wrong? I mean, I
Probably
don't
No.
think
the
so.
most popular hardcore
But, like,
band.
more
For
shows
sure.
that happen like that, the more kids are just going to be like, yeah, I'm here for all of it.
Yep.
Well,
For
and I
sure.
think, and
I'll
my,
push during Black Dahlia and I'll spin kick
Yeah.
during Knock Loose.
Yep.
Warm
Exactly.
up, just warm up them quads, bro.
Yeah,
That's
you're
all
gonna
I'm
be
saying.
sore. You're
Hell
gonna be
yeah.
sore tomorrow.
hell yeah, no, I mean, and I think to that point, that you're right, and I do think we're seeing, and I think in the past 5 or so years, we've seen
Yeah.
that there is a little less of the gatekeeping at times and
Less
the barriers. I mean,
division,
Dying
yeah.
Fetus just played FYA Fest in Tampa.
Yeah.
Wow.
A traditionally just this
With
is a
the
strictly
lights
hardcore
on.
with the lights on.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now, they had probably about the wildest crowd reaction of anybody at the whole fest.
I've
But
watched that
Obituary
set
played
3
there,
times.
too.
Oh,
That was
Obituary played
LDB.
LDB in
Okay.
in
Okay.
Louisville.
But that was also
Same
a hardcore
difference.
fest,
Mhm.
right?
Same
yeah.
difference.
Yeah, and they
Right.
loved Obituary.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They loved them.
Love it.
And there's not as much of the like you're in this camp or you're in this camp
Yeah.
at this point. That's honestly, I would almost argue that's a little bit more of an old head way of thinking
Yeah,
of like
for sure.
this you're a poser
Yeah.
or like whatever it might be, like, hey devils, you're a poser.
I think
Did you just
Obituary-
call me an old head? Because when I saw that happening, like that Dying Fetus was on there and Obituary, I was like, yes, like
I
I
think-
am here for this. Like those worlds need to come together. And you said it's an old head way of thinking, and I was like,
I will say
I'm
it's old heads who think that way. I'm an old head.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Same.
be straight up.
Yeah, same.
I wasn't born with a 5 head.
I do
okay?
feel like Obituary lends itself well to the hardcore genre
It really does.
because of the style, like just its chord progressions and those beats kind
just
of
the
just.
stomps that
Yeah,
come.
the
Yeah.
two-steppers and all
Yeah,
that.
like
They're
rock,
not
stripped
they're not
down.
super flashy technical. Yes, they'll do a guitar solo, but then also like listening to the rhythm sections, it's just a lot of power chords basically sliding around in my
And
opinion.
groove, lots
Yeah,
of groove.
lots of
it's that
groove.
all.
Yep.
And we'll get into that, but I mean, 100%. I mean, that's what I think is funny about these people who throw out posers or they try to gatekeep. It's like all these bands that you're saying are the true bands.
Mhm.
If you talk to them, they were influenced by hardcore bands. They liked
Absolutely, yeah.
Agnostic Front.
Absolutely.
They liked Cro-Mags. They liked all that shit.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just want to say this real quick before we even go. Listen, Slayer, besides Metallica, is probably one of the most influential bands ever in history, period, when
True.
it comes to extreme metal, because
Yeah.
we went over that
Yep.
many times on the show,
Mhm.
have the track record to
Agreed.
prove it. But Slayer, listen to it. Most of it's punk.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they all loved punk rock,
Yep.
and it all comes from there. So to say that it's punk rock's fault, then you got Slayer, one of the biggest extreme metal bands of all time, because of punk rock. So
Yeah.
you can't sit here and say I'm a Slayer purist metal fan, but I don't like hardcore or punk.
Right.
That just seems very counterintuitive to me.
Yeah.
yeah,
100%.
the people in the band would disagree with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
100%.
And a lot of these hardcore bands too, lending itself to what you're saying. A lot of the hardcore bands, when you talk to them about what influenced them, it's mostly metal bands.
Mm-hmm.
Metallica,
Oh yeah.
Megadeth, Typo Negative, shit like that.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, because that's the reality, right? Like, if you're early 90s, late 80s, and you're like learning guitar,
Yeah.
13-year-old kid,
Yep.
you're
You're
probably
playing
learning some
Metallica.
Metallica.
Yep.
What that's what's going to be
Most
there
accessible.
to hear,
Yep.
to know.
Yep.
Yeah, and like you're learning Metallica. And then you might hear about a band called Cro-Mags.
Yeah.
Or you might be like, "Oh man, I just heard about Bad Brains," or I heard about
Or they did the cover, Metallica on the Grouch Days Revisited.
exactly.
Last Caress.
Misfit
that-
stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
they cover
all
Misfits.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what
It's
I mean?
all there.
Yeah.
Like that influence is all there. Another thing to me, and that Luke and I kind of talked about when you think about maybe some differences sometimes between the two, is that there's the idea maybe of hard versus heavy.
Right.
Okay.
Like it's not so much like metal will lean a little bit heavy. Like it's gonna be like it needs to like it's gonna like make you
get
make
the
that
stink
face.
Yep.
Stink face, right? Heavy. Hardcore, there's parts that are hard. So they're not even necessarily, if you listen to it, you'd be like, it's not really, it's not like a chugger part. It's not like,
It's not flashy.
it's not even slow. It's not like a sludge song or a doom song or something like that. It just has a feel. It has a vibe. It's like everything together makes it hard. Like that riff is hard. Like, and it's, people are gonna be like, what the hell is this guy talking about? But like, that's sometimes the only difference between these two genres is like this hard to describe feel.
Sure.
Because it is about maybe attitude. It's more
Yeah.
about perspective, So that's how nuanced this can get. Is like it's not even that it's that much different. It's just there's like
True.
a little tinge of a feel,
Sure.
Because when we get into a band like a Marauder are not necessarily the heaviest band in the world, but when you listen to them, you're like, holy shit, like this is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A band like Madball, it's like this is hard.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you need to be walking down an alley with headphones on, listening
Yeah.
to it.
It's like this is just the
Yeah.
soundtrack to like
the streets,
violence and like
the violence.
Right.
yeah, and aggression. So but
Agreed.
like at the end of the day, like I said, it's more that overall ambiance, if you will.
Propane.
You know what's
Oh,
hard?
yeah.
yeah,
Propane.
yeah.
I just listened to them a couple days ago. I was like, shit,
That's hard.
I've been
Super
sleeping on these
hard
guys for a
band.
minute. I used to be into that. And yeah, but Propane for sure. Propane.
Super
They're a band
hard.
that they're in that they're kind of straddling those two lines.
Yep. And that's a band that I would dig. I would have called them metal until somebody called them hardcore, and then I've been like, really? Cool. I guess I do like that.
Yeah.
It's just another one of those instances where a band can be a foot in both worlds. And
You keep finding out you like these hardcore bands.
I
You gotta
know.
Start
Jeez.
spin
I mean,
kicking
you
your
s-
way out of here.
And then you look at like Biohazard and shit like
True.
that. That
Yep.
was all hardcore
Influenced,
to us
yeah.
when we were in the Pantera Machine Head days,
Yep,
So
for sure.
but they blend so well with those two bands
Yeah.
on tour.
Exactly.
Yep.
See, and to me, not knowing any better, like I was just thought Biohazard were a metal band.
Same.
I just thought I was like,
Rap metal.
they just do things a
Kinda.
little differently. But I'm like, to me, if I heard Biohazard, then I heard Machine Head. Like, what's the difference?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, like it's not that different. Like I think,
Biohazard just had a tendency to drag out like a punk riff every now and again and let the guitarist sing over it. So I'm like, oh, that's where they're getting the hardcore from.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of rap and there's just a lot of just basic metal style
exactly.
happening throughout. So they did a good job of blending all those things together.
Judgment Night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I-
Well, Judgment Night. Actually, that's Judgment Night.
When it comes to heavy versus hard, this is a very hard topic for me to wrap my head around. But you know what's hard to me when I watched Walls of Jericho and everybody's singing along, or any hardcore band and everybody grabs the mic and everybody's just there in your face. Like Shadow of Intent's not doing that.
Yeah.
Right.
No
right.
one's even really singing with Ben. He's just like, this is death metal. This is what it is. This is a performance. We're gonna steamroll your ass.
Yeah.
But when Walls of Jericho comes on, then it's just like everybody's here, everybody's jumping at the mic, everybody's jumping around. It's just this whole different mob mentality in the room when a hardcore band goes on compared to like
Gang violence.
a metal band. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
where it kind of differentiates too, is like a lot of the times, and I'm not saying this is across the board or anything, but like metal performances, metal bands, like you go to see a death metal band, or even if they have a singer in the front holding the mic, he's not putting the mic out a lot.
Right.
When you go to a hardcore band or a hardcore show and you see a hardcore band, it's almost like everyone there is part of the performance, you know?
Yeah.
Like when you're on stage and you're playing hardcore, you want that interaction.
Yeah.
You came to like enjoy this together with everyone in the room. You want kids jumping off the stage. You want kids running up, singing along. Like whenever I go to like see one of my favorite hardcore bands, like I want to like get on that mic, you know, maybe not so much nowadays because I'm old,
Right.
but
Old head.
back in the day,
Yeah.
you know, I was making sure I knew the lyrics, I knew the parts, like
Yeah.
that was almost like my favorite part as a kid, like going to shows, like being able to interact with the band, that someone that I look up to, you know, that's where it's at, man. For
Yeah.
me,
Well, and actually, now that you say that, I don't, like I said, this is not definitive. I don't want anyone like
Right.
fact checking me. There's not gonna be fact checking on this, right? I don't think so. But what I hope is that, well, not hope, but like when you say that, I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, well, Metal Pits did not start off as Metal Pits. Metal Pits, like where would that have came from? In my mind, I'm just speculating here, but I'm like, punk and hardcore had pits before metal did.
Sure.
true.
So a metal push pit evolved from like skanking and like hardcore
Pogoing.
punk pits because metal does have a tendency to be a little bit more like I'm watching the band, I'm hearing the music.
Yeah,
That's what
I
I'm here
paid
to
my
do.
money, yeah.
That's what I was thinking too in my mind. In the fans' perspective or the fans' world, hardcore is interactive.
Mhm.
And
True.
metal is more performative in the sense that we're putting on a show and people are watching the shows. I want to see beady little vampire eyes staring at me. I don't really care if they're moshing or not. It's cool if they are, they're into it. But for me, I'm just like, are people standing in front watching me?
Mhm.
For hardcore, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be right here hugging this bar, you know, just going nuts in the
Stage
pit. Yep.
diving.
Throw
You
your
know,
back out.
Yeah, and I know,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of metal bands will call for like a wall of death. I've
For
seen
sure.
Lamb of God do it. I've seen Slaughter to Prevail do it. You know,
Mhm.
let's have a wall of death. But I bet that comes from hardcore or punk.
Well, that's what I'm
You know,
saying, and
like-
like in that's probably rooted in like Bay Area thrash bands being huge hardcore punk guys
Right.
and being like, well, shit, like the scene that we are in, it's kind of like there's a lot of punk hardcore kids, and they're over here doing this, but the music's changing a little bit, and now we're push pitting.
Yeah,
Because,
it's-
like,
let's make a mosh.
It's less
you
of
know?
a groove and it's faster and all these things. So, I think that's definitely a part of it. But and like it was said though, I want to be clear. Like we're not going to sit here and get into every subgenre. We could be going into grindcore. We could have a whole episode on grindcore and how
Right. Right.
the foot in both camps with punk and hardcore, black metal, punk and hardcore,
Yeah.
death metal, punk and hardcore. I mean, if you look at any of those genres and where they start, Chuck from Death, you see all the CD layouts and all that. He's wearing agnostic front shirts.
Right.
Like he was into punk and hardcore. He wasn't like I only listen to
Power metal.
to metal. Like he listened to everything. Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, Napalm Death. Like
I was
these-
gonna say Napalm Death completely.
I mean, Napalm Death are
crusty
I
hardcore
mean,
punk. Yeah.
for sure.
they're practically a hardcore band.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
call it-
still
with-
play with hardcore bands.
Yep.
that's what I'm saying. Like
Their
they-
attitude is hardcore
Yeah.
as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
DIY as fuck.
Because they stand for something, and that's one thing we've talked about before on this show.
Mhm.
That's also a difference too, where you might have these weird metaphysical ideas when you're writing metal lyrics, or
Yeah.
it could be about
Mhm.
dragons or whatever. But
Yeah.
when you're talking hardcore, you're talking I stand for something, whether I'm straight edge or I don't eat meat
Yep.
or I fuck the cops
Yeah.
or fuck the government.
Yep.
Like
Or
we
fuck
have
'em all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we have something to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, if you look at like Chuck's lyrics in Death, like I think that's kind of an influence. I mean, he doesn't just talk about these weird like fantasy
Fantasy stuff.
worlds.
Yeah, he
He's-
got out
Yeah,
of
just
that.
after the
he's getting.
first few CDs.
but I think that's
yeah.
that's that hardcore punk ethos kind of
keeping
bleeding
it-
through. Like
keeping it
I'm
real.
having a message.
Yeah.
I have something to say here.
right.
Yep.
But that's, I mean, all those bands in that way. But like, we could be here all day getting into those things, beat down, whatever, but we're gonna. I think we're really more focused on that kind of transition, that growing from punk and hardcore and how it bleeds over into like metal as a whole, as opposed to getting deep into those subgenres. So.
Right.
Yeah, we don't need to.
So
go
so
all
really
that,
for
so.
me it starts with like 80s crossover and thrash. Like that's to me what I really start to think like holy shit, like there's a huge overlap here, and there's bands that are kind of doing it, and we start to see how we get to current times.
Right.
with that. So
can I real quick before
Yeah, for
I
sure.
didn't mean to interrupt, but just to set the stage, because if you're going to start there with the crossover, just to set the stage. So we're talking like late 70s, early 80s. You got these punk bands, the Ramones, Sex Pistols, the Clash, that kind of stuff, right?
yeah,
And that is what is starting to lead to hardcore, correct? Because
Yeah.
these bands were a little bit even harder than the normal punk. And then you start getting into what, like Black Flag, Minor Threat, Bad Brains,
For sure,
Dead
yep.
Kennedys, those kind of bands. And that's really like in the early 80s when thrash metal and all that stuff was starting.
Yep.
This is where hardcore starts. So it's adjacent to the whole metal projection too, because
True.
in the early 80s you got Metallica and Slayer, Sepultura, bands like that. And then these bands were right there alongside of it, just pushing the boundaries of punk. Like I said, Black Flag, Minor Threat, Bad Brains, Dead Kennedys, shit like that. So I know you want to get into these crossover, but I just wanted to make that clear because Modd had said that's where he's trying to figure
Gotcha.
out where
Good point.
where it links from one thing to the other.
Yeah.
So it did start
Yeah.
as punk.
'Cause-
Those punk bands that I had mentioned, the Clash,
Yeah.
the Ramones.
Because when
and
you're
then we
talking about
get
like
into
like death metal fans, not really punk fans.
True.
But once we start to go forward from punk and where metal started, then you're going to get like into the hardcore fans where there's going to be more of a melting pot.
for sure. And to
Which
that,
not every metalhead hates punk. For me, I just have a hard time getting into it because I'm like, what are we doing here? I need a little bit more pizzazz on the fiddle. Like, you know, give me
for
a
sure.
riff.
and they are quite
know?
different. I mean, that's a good point. I mean,
Yeah.
and I would say that punk, there's punk and then there's like rock, in that 70s time frame. And then I think you see punk move into hardcore a little bit before thrash starts to come up.
Right.
But I think realistically, you see in the 80s is where like it really, like you have the hardcore bands like a Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, Minor Threat, and these kids in the underground, these upcoming kids are listening to all that shit while they're listening to Black Sabbath, while they're listening to, Diamond Head, some of the new wave of British heavy metal stuff,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, I just kind of lean a little bit more towards the, melodic riffing
Yeah.
and like all that type of stuff
The
and
more
solos
metal.
and leads, and I want to do that. And then you maybe have the other camp that's like, well, no, I just really like playing fast and I like riffs and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
So that's to me, like when you talk about 80s crossover and thrash, that's why the 80s to me are like, that's where the conversation starts, because to your point, I don't think any of this stuff's that different. It's just two heads of the same coin.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, are we going to take it more in this metal direction? Or are we going to take it more in this hardcore direction?
Sure.
But with anything, if it's two sides of the same coin, it's still the same damn coin.
Yeah.
True.
So it's made out of the same materials.
Yeah. I agree.
It's just, okay, it looks and feels a little different.
Yeah.
And so that's really the end all be all. So I guess in many ways, to your point, there's punk, those bands like The Clash or Ramones or Sex Pistols. And then, yes, very different. But then as that gets heavier, more aggressive, more extreme with hardcore, that's what allows it to have the crossover. It's not, there's a big difference between, a band like Agnostic Front and Blondie,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Blondie are punk,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
There's a big difference there. But that difference being, and that's why that makes sense. You're not going to see a lot of guys at a, Cannibal Corpse show wearing a Blondie shirt,
Right.
but they might be wearing an Agnostic Front shirt.
right.
Right.
That
Yep.
wouldn't be weird, right? They wouldn't be
Right.
like, oh, what the hell?
Yeah.
But that fits right in. If Chuck was wearing a Blondie shirt, you'd be like, or a Talking Heads shirt, you'd be like, what the hell?
I'll
be like,
I'll allow it.
Poser.
But Agnostic Front, yeah. See, to be clear, we are gatekeepers, just not on this topic.
Yeah.
So yeah, no,
Well, can I say something real quick?
Sure.
I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to interrupt. But
the floor is yours.
I want you to think about something. Did you guys ever have one of those keyboards when you were a kid that you could push a button and it would play a different
Yes.
beat, or you could make
Yeah,
some
good old
weird-
Casio.
Yeah. So think about. To me, it also comes down to the beats, right? Because
Yeah,
the guitar could be playing one thing, and if you hit that button that was the metal beat on the keyboard, it would sound metal. But if you hit the punk button, then not that there was one, but that would
Right.
be more like waltz, jazz, samba, like all those
True.
different beats, because at the end of the day, it comes down to the rhythms behind it.
Yeah.
Correct.
So sometimes what only makes a difference between an actual metal band and a punk band is what the drummer's doing behind it.
100%.
Most of
and
the
what
time, yeah.
BPM it is.
Yeah, but I also feel like that said, there's a lot of shared beats between these two genres.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's why fans will gravitate toward either one. Oh, I like that beat. I like that attitude and that aggression. And this guy's just playing power chords all over the place. But then the other, another band next door, they're playing the same beat, but now we've got a lot more tenacity, technicality, and flash on the
A little
guitar.
bit more flair.
Yeah, and all of it could still have like almost that same attitude, fast, aggressive, yelling or screaming on the mic. So
Well, yeah, a band like I Hate God playing Black Sabbath riffs, but then we're just throwing a D beat underneath or a punk beat underneath it.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't sound like Black Sabbath at all anymore.
right, exactly.
And so yeah, I think and that's the thing. It's like people get caught up in these weeds or the nuance of it, but it's like, I mean, shit, is Motorhead a crossover band, or is Motorhead the prototype of crossover? I'd say, yeah, right.
Yeah,
like Motorhead,
They're almost
are they
like,
metal or are they punk?
They're more like the Ace of Spades, honestly.
They are. They are. So yeah.
Somebody with a Lemmy is God comment anywhere? Somebody
Trick
anywhere,
question.
somebody.
Trick question. Lemmy is God.
And I know we never say we're the be all end all, but at the end of the day, it's what's the cool thing about being in a band. All these bands we talk about, us playing music. At the end of the day, it's like, what can you and the four guys get together when you get the different equipment together, when you get your different ideas together? It's just like, what sound do you make? Like, you can put me in whatever the hell you want. You want to put my band in a hardcore metal, whatever.
Right.
This is just what we're making. This is what
Yeah.
feels good to us. So
Yeah.
this gets so blurred, like you said, but at the end of the day, it's just about the people involved in the attitudes, because Metallica and Suicidal Tendencies are two completely different bands, but it takes those individuals to make that, which is kind of funny that I picked those two bands just off the list because they shared the same bass player.
Bass player.
But you see what I'm saying? It's just about, at the end of the day, it comes down to the people involved.
Yeah.
And then, because, I don't know, man, like, if you want to be in a metal band, you'll be in a metal band, and you'll try your best to do what metal sounds like to you. But a lot of times you just play stuff and it doesn't come out exactly the way you think it's going to. So you can sit here and say, I want to write a song that's like this, this, and this, and it may sound like something completely different, but fans may love that shit.
True.
And you're like, oh, this is just my style, but I was trying to do this.
Right.
I was trying to fit my band into this category, but sometimes that just don't work, and the art translate to a completely different thing, you know?
For sure. And to that point, I mean, to me, like, does Metallica sound more like Agnostic Front or like Cannibal Corpse?
Interesting.
And I would say they sound way more like Agnostic Front
Yeah,
than
I
they
would
sound
say
like
that
I
Cannibal
would
Corpse.
say that too.
Yeah.
But like, to me, that's, I mean, and hopefully to me, like, when I was thinking about this episode, like, that it's just been like a pet, like, I know we're harping on it, but like a pet peeve, like this divisiveness and like, oh, I don't listen to that shit. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like stop being so caught in the weeds on this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
just and truly, if you don't like it, if you're like, if you listen to one of these bands and you're like, I hate, then hate it. It's
You
fine.
don't like it, you don't like it. Yeah,
but don't
it's
put up
not
these
for you.
arbitrary
Yeah,
walls of like,
And
no.
So
no.
it all boils down to the tribalism of anything, politics, whatever you feel about one thing. Oh, I got to feel important, so I got to be on your team. So
True.
therefore, and a lot of people don't have the mindset of saying, just because that may not be for you doesn't mean you don't have to like it or respect what's happening. But too many people get caught in the weeds, as you said, of, I'm on this team, my death metal band's way better than your dumb punk band,
Right.
blah, 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 you know,
Yeah.
because me and my death metal guys are on this team. We're sad, but we're on this team, you know, so.
And I've been there.
Yeah,
I don't want to act like I'm above it or being.
I'm not either,
gonna
dude.
tell you
I
not.
used to talk so much shit about
So did
stuff,
I.
and
Yep.
then I get to thinking about my music trajectory, and I put death metal aside to listen to new metal. So don't listen to anything I fucking say because,
Hey,
I'm just saying, like,
hell yeah,
You
I
know,
mean,
like-
like what you like.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
yeah,
what you
whatever
like,
sounds
you know?
good going into my ear holes. I'm
But
fine
you
with it.
you don't have, and sometimes it's easy just to talk shit about something you don't like because it's easy to express yourself. Like there was a band the other day we talked about. We'll just say it right now. That Chat Pile. Everybody was bragging about how great it was. I literally couldn't get through 5 songs, and I thought it was like
5
one of the
songs?
worst things I've.
2 minutes.
Yeah, it was one of the worst things I've ever heard in my life. And I've seen 10 people say it's album of the year. So I'm like, I got to listen to this.
Yeah.
It's just not for me. It doesn't mean it sucks.
Fair.
It's just
Yeah.
not for me. But it's easy for me to say, it sounds like this,
Yeah.
fucking some asshole recording an indie band in a garbage can. Like, I could be an asshole, but like, you don't have to be like that. Just because it's not for you, it's not
Yeah.
for you. That's all there is to it.
I think a lot of
it's
times,
cool that
too.
other people enjoy shit. let people enjoy shit.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
kind of what I'm trying to say. Is like
100%.
let other people enjoy shit. Like they can enjoy shit, and you don't have to dislike them just because they don't enjoy the shit you like either. Right?
100%.
Yeah, like
100%.
more and more.
Like for me, I don't get Sleep Token.
Fair,
I
fair.
don't get it. I've listened to it. I've even gave it 3 other chances after I said, like, I've told somebody it's not for me. I gave it another listen, and I'm like, maybe I'm just not hearing
Different
it.
mood, maybe. Yeah.
And then again, just not for me, and
Sure.
again, not for me, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Life goes on.
Yeah.
And maybe in 2 years you might be in some certain spot, hear a Sleep Token song, and be like, "Holy shit, this is amazing!"
Or
I
like,
didn't,
or
I've
be
done
at
that
the
so
show,
many times.
see,
right.
go to see someone that they're playing with,
Exactly.
and I'm like, all right, I get it.
Yeah.
Like a different context
Yeah.
or whatever.
Like
it is.
I just said, like with Torture, the band Torture, like
Yeah.
I don't get it on album. I'm gonna go see them live. Maybe I get it.
Yeah.
You'll get it then. I
I
promise you.
I think more and more these days, I'm
I
more
don't know.
apt to dislike a metal band, and I'm a metalhead, but that band might not do it for me.
Right.
Whereas I'm
Right.
not going to hate an entire genre. I'm not going to hate all hardcore because I don't like maybe a dozen or so hardcore bands I might have heard and like, they just don't do it for me. But then you're going to hit me with, well, you might like this band though, considering your metal taste. You might like, this XYZ hardcore band you might like. And so more and more I find myself like just taking every band on an individual basis.
Yes.
And I
For
think
sure.
that's a healthy approach
it
because
really is.
if somebody says to you, hey, have you heard this hardcore band? And stop right fucking there. No, I don't listen to hardcore. Like, that's too bad. Like,
Ew.
we're just...
And then they look at your CD collection and be like, "Fucking liar! Look at all this shit."
Yeah, look at all this hardcore you own, you fucking liar.
Earth Crisis were on Ozfest. They're a metal band.
Yeah.
I saw
Yep.
you spin
Damn it.
kicking to Earth Crisis. What the
Fucking poser.
I seen you in there stretching your quads. There's no fucking way you don't listen to hardcore.
Oh, it's
boy.
gonna be one of
You have
these.
the best hip flexors in town.
I saw you wear them gym shorts to the show.
But that's the thing. Like, are you gonna throw out the whole metal genre just because you don't like Five Finger Death Punch? Like,
No,
Right.
you're not.
but I don't like them.
Yeah,
That's
so just
fair.
take them on an individual basis.
Right.
But like,
No, that's
like what you like.
Yeah.
Like
You
what you like.
So that's really, I think, the tagline of this episode. Like what you like.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
all day, every day.
Give things
Yeah,
a shot.
look, see, we're giving our podcast a message, just like hardcore.
Look
man.
at that.
Fuck, dude.
Yeah, this is a hardcore podcast.
Yeah.
We're done with metal.
Like what you like.
Hardcore maniacs.
Hardcore maniac.
Metalcore maniacs.
Can't do that. Hardcore.
Your searches are gonna get really weird.
Hardcore-
Hardcore maniacs.
Yeah,
is gonna
no
come up
kidding.
with
I'm
some.
adding a new hashtag to all of our posts now.
Hard lore already
Girls One
exists,
Cup.
so we'll stay in
Hardcore.
our metal path. But yeah,
Yeah.
So,
but I get it. Okay. Cool.
So with that all said, I think 80s, for me, it just made sense from the 80s crossover thrash.
Yeah.
That's where these camps, I guess, if you will, start to kind of pop up.
Okay.
And there's overlap, but there's still that difference. And being that it's Metal Maniacs, that's kind of too. I guess I didn't say that either, but being that it's Metal Maniacs, to me, people who are listening to this are metalheads. You
Yeah.
know, and I think it's 2024. Like it's not that simple. I'm a metalhead.
Sure.
So am I.
But like I think it's more likely that your listeners, people who enjoy Metal Maniacs, maybe aren't really versed in hardcore. So that's kind of the lens we wanted to take it from, is like
Sure.
somebody listening
sure.
to this probably doesn't care enough about hardcore to know every little bit of the history
Yeah.
and every little detail.
Yeah, it's
I just really would hope that some, maybe hearing the conversation, understanding how it relates to metal,
How we got here today.
and
Yeah.
some things that
Yeah.
maybe they should check out because, hey, this is going to expand your horizons a bit.
Yeah.
This is, and there's even sections like, my thought process is recommend some stuff that people could check out. And it's not necessarily because it's the best album or it's the
Right.
pinnacle, but hey, I think of these bands. If you listen to these albums right now, if you put it in your car and you're riding to work tomorrow morning and you're a metal guy, you might find yourself finding a new band that's your favorite band, or a band that you're like, I love this shit.
Yeah,
Right.
at least something you fuck with,
For sure. So with 80s crossover and thrash, obviously without further ado, it's the Bay Area, bands, all the the big four,
Yep.
when you think of bands like Slayer.
Slayer.
Metallica, Anthrax,
Even
Cotton
Megadeth.
Moss.
Yeah,
early-
Megadeth.
Yeah, some early stuff.
yeah,
for
Megadeth
Sure.
for sure. Like they all share that they all would tell you, hey, we love hardcore, we love
Yeah.
punk, whether it's the Misfits, whether it's Minor Threat, whatever it is. Slayer released Undisputed Attitude, which that is basically just hardcore covers,
Yep.
punk covers.
Yep.
And there's even songs on there that from Jeff Hanneman's band before Slayer that they are punk hardcore songs.
Yeah.
And so
I know
there's a clear overlap there.
I I think Megadeth has kept Anarchy in the UK a staple of their set for many, many years, decades.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
so
that.
So Dave's always been a punk fan. I know Anthrax, Scott Ian. If you meet him, shake his hand, he'll tell you I love hardcore like immediately. Punk hardcore is like where Scott Ian comes from in his background.
Exactly.
He loved that East Coast stuff. So all of those bands came up on that. I feel like, and Metallica's another one we mentioned with like Garage Band or Garage Days or whatever.
Garage Inc.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
They did all kinds of covers in that genre.
Exactly. Like it. I mean, it's there, and I mean, so with that said, just some bands and like kind of I guess my thought process, and obviously what we can tweak it up, but just kind of go through some bands
Sure.
that are in that vein. When you look at a band like DRI, I mean, they have an album called Crossover.
I have that on tape.
So like DRI, like if you listen to DRI, like what are we saying? Like what are they?
I mean,
Are they metal? Are they hardcore? What
Yeah,
are they?
they're right there in that thrash metal vein. I think the only distinction there for that band particularly would maybe be the vocals. Where it doesn't sound like Joey from Anthrax singing. It sounds more like a hardcore yapper, and he's not really
Kind of a shout.
Yeah, and it's it's not as melodic, say, as maybe another band's vocalists, but I think if you take him out and replace him with a metal vocalist, then they're a metal band.
Basically.
And so like some bands, it's almost just like a matter of one component
Mm-hmm.
might distinguish your band from metal or hardcore or punk.
And like Jay said, it's like it could be BPMs. It could be this band plays at 120, this band plays at 220.
At 220, yeah.
Yep.
Or whatever that difference might be. But yeah, to me, DRI is a band that. Which are they?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I don't know, and like that makes sense. Crossover is where that comes from.
Yep.
To me, the band that pops off my head when I think of like crossover, it comes down to like Agnostic Front.
Yeah.
Blurring the Lines. And I'd say like Cro-Mags, like Age of Quarrel. Those are the things that really pop into my head. Like, what are you thinking when you're thinking like that 80s crossover, hardcore thrash camps?
As far as like the 80s, I think of like Suicidal, a little bit of Leeway.
You think Suicidal kind of had that punk attitude, right?
They really did, yeah.
Being from
or the
out
Bay,
west,
the
and
Bay,
then
right?
Yeah, I think so.
Out
Bay
west, and then just kind of having that whole attitude too.
Yeah,
of-
the culture out
Yeah.
there. Yeah, Cro-Mags. I know they're influential. I've never really been a Cro-Mags guy,
Mhm.
and I know you know a little bit more about that, so I would definitely let you speak on that. So I
Well,
don't
to me,
bite my
Cro-Mags
tongue.
have been that band. I mean, they were to me kind of crossover with Age of Quarrel, but then they even get heavier and get like more like, and we'll get into this, but they kind of get into more like metallic hardcore. When they start right there, you have a couple albums like end of the 80s, early 90s, that it's less fast and more groove.
Okay.
And I think that's where that's really to me where we see, I think things start to transition. But I think it's just heavier. It becomes more groovy.
Yeah.
Maybe a little more urban influence, if you will. I think
Definitely,
when you think of like a Biohazard, those bands, I think a lot of it was New York bands
Okay.
hearing stuff that's happening in the Bay Area or hearing this metal stuff or hearing these other things and being like, I like that, but I haven't been trying to do it my whole life, so I don't know exactly. Remember, this is before internet, right?
Yeah.
Right.
For listeners out there, the internet has not always been around. I know
Right.
sometimes
Wild.
it's hard to believe now because it just is. But you would hear something and you didn't know what genre it was. You didn't know, let me hop on YouTube and learn how to play that. So you're just listening
Right.
and you're like, well, how the hell do you play that riff?
Yeah.
And you do the best of what you can do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of it too. Is like Agnostic Front was hearing, some Metallica tapes.
Yeah.
Where they were hearing this stuff and they were like, that's cool, but I have no idea what they're doing. I've never seen these guys. I don't know what they look like.
Right.
But cool, like I'm gonna play some of that stuff. Or maybe they're coming through your town and you see them and you're like, whoa, that was cool. What was that?
Yeah. Right.
And then, you're less concerned about the bullshit and you're just like, that song was cool or that drum beat was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so these bands, when I think of like Carnivore's predating, Type O.
Yeah.
Carnivore are a crossover band.
Okay.
If you listen to that, it's very, very hardcore. And then that somehow in Type O are metal. They're doom. There's all that kind of stuff, sludginess
Gothic.
to it.
Yeah.
And it's like,
But they still had some
Type O
punk.
still has the hardcore. They show
Some of
those
it.
influences because
Yeah.
they're eclectic, I would say.
Yeah.
But SOD, speaking of Scott Ian,
Scott,
Yeah.
Stormtroopers of Death, to me, like I said, when I heard that, to me it's metal, it's thrash metal.
Okay.
But if you actually look into it, like, oh no, it's crossover, right? It's not actually thrash, But that's where this stuff starts to be. Are we being silly by even like being like, oh, this is hardcore, this is metal?
Right.
But truly, to me, SOD, like I think because of maybe the structures of the songs, they're short.
Yeah.
That's the other thing is like, well, a metal song might have been a 3-minute version of that same song.
Right.
You just had a couple more riffs.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's literally all the same shit. So those little nuances, but yeah, leeway. I mean, leeway, you're going to hear, if 2024, you go to shows, you go to a metal show, you go to a hardcore show, metal kids aren't talking about leeway.
No.
Hardcore kids are talking about leeway.
I don't know
A lot of
anything about
hardcore kids
leeway.
aren't even talking about leeway.
And to that point, leeway, to me, those vocals are very melodic. They are very singy, but the music is way harder, when you listen to leeway. It's way more groovy. It's way more, it feels more hardcore than it does metal.
Right.
But it's crossover. So to me, all that, Corrosion and Conformity started off as a crossover band.
Okay.
Back in the 80s, they were very political. They were very fast.
Yep.
Very kind of, a little more rawness to it.
Yep.
And then they just kind of expanded, right? And they kind of get more, their Southern roots show a little bit, and they start to kind of they just didn't pigeonhole themselves, and they just did what they wanted to do, kind of what we've been saying, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, all those bands to me are in that crossover thrash. And like I said, honestly, the hope is listeners are like, wow, those are metal bands.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can start to see how it's not all that different.
Yeah.
But for me, or Power, if we want to bring it to modern times, Power Trip.
Yeah. That's a metal band to me, but I could see where you would call them otherwise, because Riley's vocals were like either or. He would go from the hardcore shouting to like almost like a metal fry vocal almost. He was kind of right there in the middle with that. And the riffs to me are metal, like crispy, clean thrash metal, but also they had like that punk beat at times where like that's a hardcore band.
Yeah.
So your opinion I think that's a good example of a crossover band these days.
Yeah.
So any more you wanted to add on to the Power Trip there, because you brought him up?
Well, I'm just saying, I think that's just really, I think that's like a band to me that I think a lot of your listeners or someone that's into metal,
Yeah.
they're probably thinking Power Trip. They're like, well, that's a metal band.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think in many
I don't
ways,
think they would categorize themselves as a metal band.
Fair.
I think they would call themselves kind of a hardcore band.
why do you think, and that's the thing, I think that helps us to understand this a little bit, like why?
I think it's just because of how they came up and how they were perceiving the band themselves.
And probably some of the other bands that they played with. It
Correct.
has a lot to do with it,
Yeah.
too.
The
Your
circle.
scene.
their
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that is ethos, right? They were, they were a band that, and that's kind of mine, like not to make it about me, but like for me, my experience, like growing up, like I was a metal kid through and through, metalhead. I remember going to shows around town and like I hated every punk band, I hated every hardcore band, and I made it my life's duty to just be like, you suck, you're not talented.
Quit.
The difference between you.
4 chords.
Back then, my attitude was
Is
the
that
difference
all?
between a hardcore band and a metal band is talent.
Sure.
That's it.
Yeah.
One band sucks, one doesn't.
Yeah.
And but I think that's immaturity. I think that's a misunderstanding of things. But
right.
I think for me it was like hardcore scenes were where I related. It was what, to me, it felt like that's what I want to do. I didn't want to necessarily have everything be so distant or have it be a rock star vibe, because I think metal versus hardcore, it's a little more of like the rock star, like, well, a metal band's gonna be playing a big stage with monitors and all this fancy stuff, and
Crazy
a lot
lights, smoke.
Exactly.
Sometimes,
Sure.
Yeah.
hardcore bands are gonna be playing at some hall that you can go up to and you can see and touch them in real life,
All the
and
lights on.
they're gonna hang out afterwards and you're gonna get to know them.
Yep.
For sure.
And to me, as somebody coming up, it's like,
No noise gates.
yeah, no noise gates or
noise
tuner pedals, but it's just it's a reality of what's accessible. And to me, the hardcore scene and hardcore community is had been way more accessible.
Sure.
And it was something
True.
you could get into and you could
Yeah.
touch it and see it and be a part of it. Whereas
Mm.
metal felt like this thing where it's like,
You had to watch from afar.
yeah, it's like, well, they're big time,
Yeah.
True.
Even if they were bands that are kind of on the same level, it's like, well, it just still felt like, well, that was more big time.
I
You
feel
know?
like that's what kind of that's what kind of drew me towards the hardcore scene, was like going to hardcore shows and seeing everything like up close, and like how everybody interacted with each other. Almost more of a community, kids getting on stage, jumping off, shit like that, like almost welcoming it, and to where I grew up going to a lot of metal shows, and there was never a chance to interact with the band like we were talking about before. That's what definitely drew me to more of like participation.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's weird though too. I feel like with the popularity of Metallica becoming one of the largest metal bands in
the
history,
world.
period.
Yeah.
And this was even back in the Black Album days.
True.
So that metal category got catapulted into everyday homes, and then a lot of metal bands almost became more of the rock star because you kind of had the hair metal before,
True.
and they still had the metal moniker, even all that shit's pussy. But I know we said we wouldn't be gatekeepers.
I fuck with that too.
I
fuck
do
with
too.
that.
I was gonna-
Give me
like,
some
Jay
Rat,
just-
give me some
yeah.
Queensryche all
Jay
day,
just
baby.
assassinated my whole
No.
childhood.
Yeah.
Just like
You're a pussy.
Skid Row, Motley Crue, Warrant Heaven, all
I'm
that.
kidding. I'm just not into hair metal, but it does it does say metal in the title, right? So those
Yeah.
guys were the rock stars. So then you
Yes.
start just equating the term metal to all these untouchable rock stars and all these
Yes.
guys that are on stage doing all the
glam.
crazy shit.
Yeah.
Even bands like Ozzy and all that. But where were the punk guys? There was no punk guys doing that, or
Yeah,
the hardcore guys. Like
yeah,
it just, I just felt like it never catapulted to that level.
Not from where it was in the 70s with like the Ramones and the Clash. I think they might have been rock stars, but not in the. It didn't carry over. It didn't
Not in the same sense.
It
Yeah,
felt
maintain.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, but even in the '90s, there was nobody saying like that hardcore band. That's
Well, to me, it would be
you
Nirvana.
know,
True.
like Parent,
Nirvana
you
would
know?
be the progression of
Right.
the punk stuff.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
fair.
So when you hear Nirvana, that was the progression of the Clash,
Yeah.
Okay, fair.
right?
Yeah,
Or the Ramones.
Yeah.
And the Ramones, I mean, they were playing huge gigs, in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they were huge, and the Ramones are huge, right?
Yep.
Same thing with the Misfits. A lot of these things are posthumously, right? They broke up and then they became bigger or whatever
Yep.
it was. But definitely, but it's still a different energy and a different vibe, right? Like
Yeah.
that larger than life thing that comes from metal,
Mhm.
and then just being like pissed and angry and just like more, maybe it is more like, it's like more humanized, right? It's like, this is just our day-to-day shit, and I'm just angry and I'm mad, and that's kind of the punk and hardcore thing.
Can I add one more little thing in here
course.
too? What I just came to mind, almost theatrics too. There's a
Yeah,
lot more.
true.
We all said at this table, metal's more of the spectacle, and then start thinking about not just the hair metal bands that Mod grew up on and loves. Still to this
Sorry,
day,
Mod.
listen to
Still-
them all the time. But even they wore girl makeup and
Yeah.
did up their hair and had certain outfits.
Yep.
That's what Mod
punk,
loved.
Punk
I mean,
rock and hardcore.
Bruce Dickinson and Iron
Yeah,
Maiden.
yeah. Punk rock and hardcore had their kind of own outfit, but it was
True.
more just less what my community's wearing, what my style is. Not saying they didn't have style, but when you're talking
High
about metal,
tops.
there's more theatrics going on
Yeah.
there. Getting the blown out hair, getting the mascara, or wearing your
Yep.
own shirt like Megadeth always did. Like you had your own kind of theatrics going, and then you
True.
can even go on. You had the King Diamond shirt on. I mean, that's all theatrics when you start really getting
Yeah.
into the.
Yep.
You're not seeing punk or DIY bands that much where
No,
makeup until you start getting into like black metal shit, but we're not talking about that right
No.
now. But that it's also a theatrics thing too. I think there's a lot more of that
Yeah,
in
there's
metal
even
than there is
choreography.
Hardcore's like, this is how I showed up.
Yeah.
We're fucking gonna jam.
Yeah.
Where
For sure.
metal, you might be dicking around for a while before you get up there.
yeah, but it's
'cause-
like what Luke
yeah.
said. I think like that, like the participation. That
Yeah.
is the theatrics of a hardcore show, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Yep.
a hardcore shows. I mean, to me, that's kind of the thing. Like like I said, when I was coming up, it's like metal had a more of a feel of like, well, how much are we going to get paid? Are my expectations all going to be met by what I need? I need a smoke machine, or I need lights, or I need monitors, or I
M&Ms,
need all
no
these
brown.
things. Hardcore bands coming up, it just felt way more. None of that shit matters. Whether it be kids there, whether it be energy.
Yeah,
That's all we need. That's all we care about.
$5
I don't need
an
a
hour.
stage.
Yeah.
I don't need a good
True.
PA.
I need
Whether it be
electricity.
kids and energy.
Yeah,
Yep.
and electricity.
Give me a plug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bad show in the hardcore scene is bad turnout or no energy.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the
Sure.
worst thing that could happen. Whereas
It
I
just
think
falls flat.
in a metal world, it's like, well, my smoke machine didn't work, and
I
It
missed
ruined the
my-
whole gig,
I
or like-
missed a note on my solo.
yeah, I
type
missed a
deal.
note, or my guitar was out of tune, or the amp was fucking up.
Yeah.
It's like That's what made it a bad show. And like I said, hopefully people can start to see how stupid these little differences are.
Yeah,
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not really shit that matters when it comes down to it. There's differences, but they're not major.
Yeah.
So to wrap up that 80s crossover thrash era, to me, and feel free to jump in if anyone's thinking about something that would relate, but if I was somebody listening to this, I haven't really listened to hardcore, I've never dug into it. Power Trip for a modern thing for sure.
Sure.
Check out Power Trip if you haven't. You'll understand crossover and you'll start to see that hardcore metal overlap. But to me, Suicidal Tendencies, How Will I Laugh Tomorrow If I Can't Smile Today.
Great album.
That's an album that to me it's not my favorite album by them, but if you're trying to this is all about dipping your toes in
Yeah.
Sure.
and expanding your horizons a bit.
Yep.
Listen to that album. There's solos.
Yeah.
There's melodicism.
Yep.
There's everything you would want in an 80s thrash metal album,
True.
but it also has hardcore parts.
Yeah.
It has hardcore style vocals. It has him talking at times,
Yep.
you know.
Yep.
It has that real, it's not fantastical worlds. It's about the person. It's about people. It's
Yeah.
about my own struggles. It's not about, slaying a dragon in Mordor.
Yeah, just
and
wanted a Pepsi, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
Just wanted a
Just
Pepsi.
wanted a Pepsi.
It's that relatableness. It's got a little more groove to it than maybe a Metallica album might.
Yeah.
So
The
that's,
grooves may be infectious.
they
I'll
might.
tell you,
They
there's,
might. Ooh.
there's a little funkiness to it too.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and so there's that piece. So that to me is an album, and I'm thinking I think maybe I'll make a little playlist too, and
That'd be
I
awesome.
can get
Then
that
I
over
can
to
share
you.
it
would be
in the
sick.
comments.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That's something we
Luke
talked
and I
about
can
Sounds
curate
good.
a little playlist.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. Because then I can listen to it too.
Yeah, for sure.
But I've been wanting to do that when we do these kind of episodes and then attach them. That way people can just click the link and listen to any of these
Hell yeah.
bands that we're talking
We
about.
need to get on that one.
Hell
day.
yeah.
God damn it.
So like Leeway, Born to Expire. I'll be honest, Leeway is a band I got into much later in life. I would
So
say
did I.
in the past 2 or 3 years even.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
And that's the frustrating part about these differentiations of hardcore and metal. Because to be transparent, I don't really like DRI. I'm not a
Okay.
fan.
Sure.
I'm
But
not
I-
a big fan either.
But I listen to DRI. I know them. I've listened to them a ton because they're metal. They're more in the metal camp of things. I don't like DRI. Leeway, I fucking love Leeway.
Okay.
I love Born to Expire and the album after this are both great albums in my opinion. And once again, there's some melodicism in there in the vocals. It's
R.I.P. Eddie.
R.I.P. Eddie Leeway. But great vocals, melodic. But the music's just a little more raw, stripped down, aggressive.
Hard song.
It's hard. They're hard songs.
Yeah.
And they're it's not heavy.
Mm-mm.
It's hard. But it's fast. It's thrashy,
Mhm.
but in a different way. And to me, Leeway, Born to Expire would be a great album for someone if you like metal, especially if you're like, well, I like Metallica in the 80s. If you like Suicidal Tendencies, you will more than likely love Leeway. So check out Leeway. There's solos. There's everything you'd want to hear in metal.
Okay.
Shows up in Leeway.
Nice.
And then to me, SOD, Speak English or Die. I can't talk about this era of crossover and all that if I don't reference that. To me, there's heavy. When you think of March of the SOD and the
Yeah.
What was their singer's name?
Billy Milano.
Billy Milano.
Billy Milano. Yeah.
Yep.
I kept wanting to say Chuck Billy. That's testament.
That's
Yeah.
That is, and Billy Milano would just be miserable that you just compared him because
Yeah,
actually
he'd
he
probably want to
hated
fight me.
Chunk Billy is what he called him
Chunk
on the little
Billy, yeah.
SOD
I
documentary.
think Billy Milano hates metal.
But they,
I think
yeah,
Billy
well, I think-
Milano hates most things.
Yeah,
I think Billy
fair.
Milano should have left. He should have left it at Speak English or Die and hanging out with Scotty and
Yeah.
having good music.
Yeah.
Should have.
But that to me then gets us into this late 80s, early 90s, metallic hardcore.
I love that it says Metallica hardcore.
That was a typo, but see, you see
It
the
makes
blur.
sense.
It's
I'm gonna
Freudian.
fix that, Metallic
Blending
hardcore.
genres.
For sure. So, when I think of this is where it starts to just progress more and more into groove,
Yep.
heavy and hard. And I think lines are starting to become way more blurred.
Definitely. Definitely. Especially with a Marauder or
All Out War.
All Out War for sure.
Okay.
All Out War definitely had way
That's-
more metal
metal as
influence.
fuck to me.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Well, you listen to
and-
New All Out War, it's just extreme metal. I mean,
and
it's
yeah,
black metal, death metal. It's
Okay.
not.
I'm pretty sure I bought I can't remember what album it is, but oh man, it's gonna kill me. I'll think of it later. But one of the All Out War albums I bought in the metal section in our local CD store here.
For those
in-
ones crucified.
I think so. Yes.
the first
And
one
I
that's got
thought
the-
it was a metal album. I bought it. I listened to it. I thought it was metal. It wasn't until like
Idiot.
Yeah, exactly. Like years and
Jerk.
years down the line that I realized it was like, considered a hardcore band. And still I would say like I fully got into All Out War like maybe in the last 10 years.
For sure. And like that to me, that's how I would describe Hatebreed. Like when
True.
I first heard
Yeah.
Satisfaction that this is the Death of Desire, I just thought this is metal. They're
Same,
a metal
yeah,
band.
kind of
Yeah.
the same to me.
They're just like a heavier thrash band.
Right.
You know, that's what I thought of when I thought of that. But definitely I'd say Cro-Mags are the ones that kind of start to make it a little groovier and heavier, slow it down a little bit. Biohazard to me probably deserve most, if not all, of the credit for at least proliferating that, because Biohazard were huge.
Sure.
They're on tour with bands like Fear Factory. They're on tour. I mean, they're the ones that's kind of
Pantera.
spreading that hardcore gospel. Yeah, they're touring with Pantera. They're
Yep.
touring with
True.
Fear Factory. They're touring with all those bands.
Yeah.
But they're a hardcore band.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, they're a hardcore band. They're New York hardcore, you know, through and through. And they had the groove, they had the heavy, but they also had the hard.
Brooklyn, right?
I believe so.
Isn't that what they
I don't want to misrepresent them. I'm gonna.
I don't want to either.
New
That's
York.
that's
Well,
all.
that's
That's
fair.
all on Luke and Nick. Actually, if you're mad that we misrepresented
That's Jay.
the message, or Luke, Jay, whoever send it to Luke. Send it to Luke.
Yeah, Luke.
Send
Luke
all your
Forton.
hate
Send
my
it to
way.
Luke.
Yeah.
But definitely, I mean, yeah, like All Out War, like that. They're pretty metal. But I think that's also the point. Like it's metallic hardcore. Like it's not like we're not hiding it, right? It's hardcore that basically are super into metal. You know, but it just has maybe it is more stripped down. We're not going to have a 7-minute long song. We're not going to, you know, play a show with, you know, Megadeth. You know, we're not playing the big stages. We're playing the halls. We're playing it, you know,
Yeah,
the raw energy.
2-foot stage.
for sure.
So let me just ask this question. Then, when you say metallic hardcore, these bands are basically taking the attitude and the ethos and everything we talked about that differentiates the two, and now they're taking all of that and then they're just placing it in their form of metal. Basically, that's how you would say metallic hardcore. Then
Basically, yeah.
I'm going to push back. I'm going to be a pain in the
okay.
ass. Don't go.
I was just gonna say like
that's
to-
why I'm asking. I don't
to
know.
me, to me, metallic hardcore is like not the same as metalcore, but like it's almost just like hardcore with just more chugs, more metal riffs,
Okay.
basically, a little more screamy, and not as shouty.
And I
with,
think
with the vocals,
And I
Yeah.
think I think maybe Modd said this, but the point of musicians aren't necessarily thinking about it as much. Musicians are just listening to their favorite album and being like, "That's fucking cool," or they're playing a show and being like, "That band was cool. Like, that was cool. That 1-foot blast was cool. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna try that," or whatever it is. And I don't think it's as intentional as maybe what you're saying. I don't think they're like, "Well, I don't want to be a poser and not be hardcore anymore, but I do want to play my guitar a little more." Than
Yeah,
I
that's
do."
not
Right,
what I'm
right.
saying. I'm
No,
just saying overall as a whole, that's kind of where metallic hardcore leans. Basically, is a lot of
Yes.
the hardcore ethos, but then we're just adding more metal
to
elements.
it.
Like
Yeah.
they probably didn't look in the
Yes.
mirror and say, "Dude, I'm playing hardcore
Metal.
metallic hardcore
Metallic
today."
hardcore.
And yeah,
You know,
yeah,
but,
yeah, and
But
it's just-
basically, is what I'm saying is when you say metallic hardcore, and I'm looking at
Yes.
this list of bands, it's like you could say all these bands are hardcore, but they're just adding more metal elements than some of the predecessors.
It's the
of
evolution,
hardcore.
right? Yeah, It's definitely the evolution.
And again, the other way, because I still remember the first time I ever heard Marauder. You gave me a VHS tape
Yep.
of like just a bunch of music videos.
Yeah.
The Marauder Master Killer video was on
Yep.
there. I
Declaration of
remember seeing
Independence.
it and being like, "Oh, this is a crazy metal band, dude."
Yeah.
And like, I was only like probably 18
Yeah.
at that time, and it didn't.
I thought they were suicidal tendencies on steroids.
Right,
Yeah, like more
right.
metal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't help that the dude was like kind of that ethnicity with the long braids and stuff too. Like,
Yeah,
I
and the
remember
drummer
that.
was like playing with like dark glasses and like a toothpick in his
Yeah,
mouth, and I was
yeah.
like, oh shit, this is like
Yeah.
these are like some gangster dudes
Yeah,
that
it's,
play
it's
metal.
hard as fuck. Like it's like these dudes like get that like Biohazard vibe, right?
Yep,
Like they're
yep.
like that urban,
Sure.
urban type of thing. But definitely Biohazard. Definitely. So there's a band from Cleveland called Integrity.
Yep.
They're, to me, they are in my opinion, they are like the heart and soul of what metallic hardcore is.
Okay.
And to me, they're a band that if you are into metal, if you're one of these guys that's like, I just can't see it, I don't understand it, I don't get listen to Integrity.
Okay.
You listen to Integrity, it could not be clearer to me what metallic hardcore is. It's heavy, it's sludgy, it has groove, but we're also gonna trem pick. There's gonna be some trem picking in here. There's gonna be some double bass in here, all that type of stuff. And so to me, Integrity are like at the heart and soul of it. I think Madball come to mind when I think of metallic hardcore.
For sure.
They're definitely like, let's be clear though, Biohazard and Madball, I would say they lean a little more towards just like hardcore, the clanky bass,
Definitely
groove.
more street too.
Yeah.
Like Biohazard and Madball.
Yeah, like that
Than
street,
Integrity.
that urban kind of vibe. Whereas Integrity to me are like evil. Like
'Cause I mean,
it has
like-
an evil sound. It sounds like Satan is
True.
writing the music.
And I just heard Scott Vogel talk about when Integrity came around, they basically changed the landscape of hardcore because
Mhm.
at that point it was a lot of like youth crew and like a lot of jerseys and basketball shorts, and Integrity came in and made everything a lot darker.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I mean, without Integrity too, there's no Buried Alive.
No.
But like Integrity, like that's maybe a good way of looking at it, is to just like they were not urban. They were not the typical maybe hardcore ethos. They were a little maybe more. They kind of start to bring in maybe fantastical things, or were writing about more. It's not real life. It's just fucking evil. It's dark. It's referencing. It's very anti-religion. It's anti-God. Whatever it is. It's
almost anti-everything.
It's like it's just looking at the human race and just being sickened and disgusted by
Mhm.
everything.
Nihilistic hardcore.
Yeah.
For sure. And All Out War, I would say, are in that same vein. I think All Out War are a little bit more, they lean a little more metallic at times, like they're a little more metal than Integrity might be.
True.
Strife, I think, lean more towards hardcore.
Definitely.
But still, when you listen to that, there's just thrash riffs everywhere. Everywhere there's thrash riffs on Strife, but you can see where,
Strife
like,
is such a pissed band too.
that's the thing, like the angry energy and
It's
things like that.
definitely primal.
Yep. Marauder were a band that I got into late in life.
Same.
Like
I heard it early in life, but I didn't get into it till way later.
yep. And a lot of that was because I think that the hard versus heavy, it is much more of like it's just different, right? It doesn't strike me right away as Black Dahlia Murder and like this
Right.
is extreme. It's
Yeah.
like eh. But yeah, Earth Crisis for sure. I'm talking about that hardcore ethos. I mean, Earth Crisis
Straight
are
edge
that.
vegan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's they're as much a messaging as they are a music.
And it was crazy that Earth Crisis grabbed me so much when I first heard them because of their message. Like, I wasn't vegan. I loved burgers.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
wasn't straight edge.
Yep.
I loved fucking off.
Yep.
And I was just like, I don't care what this is. It was
Same.
almost like when I saw them, it was at that Milwaukee Metal Fest, saw death metal band after death metal band, corpse paint, battle spikes, everything. I was loving it. But then Earth Crisis came out and I was like, these fucking dudes look like me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they started playing. And I was like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Yep.
They fit so well with those bands, in part, again, to Carl's credit as a vocalist. Like, he had
True.
more of a fry vocal
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
than a yell or a shout.
Yeah.
And I think that lent itself so well to death metal fans, because when I saw it, I was like, wow, that's weird. They don't have the long hair, the cut off sleeveless t-shirts or whatever. They just look like average kids, like with the
Yep.
baseball cap, short hair, t-shirts, cargo pants, whatever, and I'm like, that's different. They don't look like metalheads at all.
Mhm.
but they sound like metal to me.
Yeah, they're
so-
fast. They're
Yeah,
heavy.
I'm pretty sure that Cradle of Filth played after them.
That is wild.
Yeah,
Yeah, back
Earth
then,
Crisis
for
to
sure.
Cradle of Filth.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is wild.
That's the show you want to go to. Get all the
And that's a perfect example of the metal theatrics and all the shit that was needed to get Cradle of Filth up there
Yep.
compared to Earth Crisis and their amps. That's all they needed.
Yep,
and
pretty
fucking
much.
drums that you could hear.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
for sure.
And some
You get-
veggies.
Yeah, you get Cradle of Filth up there, and they need to have fucking keyboards and layouts and makeup
Costumes.
and costumes.
Pretty
and
sure
all
they
that
Backing
had like
shit.
tracks and-
when I
Yeah.
saw them, they had like a opera singer on
Yeah.
stage
Yep.
with them.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Sarah Jezebel.
love it.
But
Fuck with it.
but I would say in this area, like I was saying, like, you know, I think the band that kind of proliferated it largely too was Hatebreed, right? Like Hatebreed to me are the ones that kind of brought it to the masses. They were the band that's going to be on Ozfest now, and all the metal heads are going to be like, "Fuck yeah!"
Yep.
And I think, but at the end of the day, like Hatebreed are a hardcore band.
Sure.
They they
Definitely.
appealed to metal dudes,
Yep.
metal folks, right?
Sure.
And I think that's largely what it is. Now, I think that influenced Hatebreed to, you know, they liked metal. And so they, you know, and they're playing, they're with these bands, they're going on tour with metal bands, you know, and that's kind of, it's going to influence what you're doing because you're listening to that, you're hearing that. And so I think, yeah, as you see Hatebreed, they progress and they become much more metal through their albums. You know, if you listen to
Definitely.
Satisfaction to Perseverance, you can already start to see it.
Mhm.
Yep.
But then if you go from Perseverance to Modern Time, Hatebreed, you know, it's very metal now.
Sure.
You know, they're very modern metal in many ways, but they're still
Especially
hardcore.
on like the self-titled.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
100%. So, you know, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up 100 Demons. 100 Demons are
Love 100 Demons.
one of the best metallic hardcore bands, in my opinion, of all time.
Bruce LePage follows me on Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
That
Speak
was,
of that.
that was one that Luke had showed
In
me.
Eyes
and
of the Lord.
I gravitated towards them because they were just angry and pissed. And
Dude.
with a name like 100 Demons, you're like, yeah, that's something I got to spin for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you listen to their self-titled. I mean, their first album
Yeah,
is
that's
great,
Is
but it's
great,
definitely
yeah.
more hardcore.
It for sure is.
Whereas, you know, the
When they
singer
got
on
Pete.
Pete, the singing on the self-titled, I mean, there's like clean metal singing on there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not Dio, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's melodic.
Yeah.
It's you can hear what he's saying. There's riffs that are straight up just metal. It's metal. There's solos. There's everything like that. But at the end of the day, if you see 100 Demons show, you
Be
want to
careful.
look the fuck out. Like don't
Be
like get away
careful.
from the crowd. Like if you don't
Right.
want to be injured or assaulted,
Jesus.
get in the balcony because there's no one safe. And
crazy.
that's, I mean, at the end of the day, that's hardcore, right? Like that
Right.
aggression, that energy. Before we get into Expand Your Horizon, is there anything that you'd want to add on, or any bands we want to?
I just really love 100 Demons so much.
Hell yeah! So to me, Expanding Your Horizons, Marauder, Master Killer, as you said, like
For sure.
you got to listen to that album.
have to.
I think if you're a metal guy, you listen to that with the idea of like I'm trying to understand this, getting into it. It's for sure going to be there. Hatebreed, Perseverance. Now, not my favorite album. Not
But
at all.
it's an important album.
It's important. I think a metal guy would appreciate the production of it. I think it's way more metal leaning than like Satisfaction is their first album, which is my favorite. I think that's where if somebody popped it in on their way to work, they're going to be like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm in this. Now, I find it hard to believe that someone hasn't heard Hatebreed at this point.
Yeah.
If they're listening to Metal Maniacs, but maybe
Who
they haven't.
knows? Who knows?
Maybe they've been saying, no, I'm only going to listen.
Yeah,
to
that's a dumb hardcore band.
Yeah, like
Yep.
they might have not been listening.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Integrity,
I still listen to that album at the gym all the time.
Perseverance,
Yep.
Call for Blood. Like I could just put that on repeat and like
Mm-hmm.
Get swole.
I'm good.
Swole it.
Integrity, Humanity is the Devil. Once again, maybe not my favorite, their best album, but Humanity is the Devil is the one that I would feel like, especially with the more updated, like they've done some remastering and updated mixes on it
Okay.
in the past couple of years. I think that's something that someone could listen to and be like, this is evil. This is metal.
Yeah.
Dude.
Like I said,
Do yourself a favor and listen to the 100 Demons self-titled.
Yep.
It's still to this day one of my favorite albums. It's got great chant parts, great lyric content, like just pissed riffs. Like, oh man, I love that band so much. Thanks for bringing that up.
And I would find it hard for I don't know how if you like metal.
I don't know how you won't like that album.
Like I don't get it. Like if you listen to that and you're like, this shit sucks, and like I want to know what metal you're listening to.
Right.
Because for the most part, I'm like 100 Demons are metal.
And how old is that album? That had to have been like 2003.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's old.
2003, 2002.
2003 is old. I'm crying
because they've been defunct for a while, right?
Well, they're back.
Oh,
they're
are
still
now?
playing shows.
Yeah,
I
thought
played,
they were defunct for a while.
They
right?
were.
Yeah.
They've never been done.
No, they've always just kind of taken a hiatus, but they did just play Tied Down.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And they had a great.
But their
set.
bass player or
Just
OG
passed.
bass player just passed,
Yes,
right?
like a couple months ago.
But yeah, 100 Demons for sure. I mean, like, well, that came out I think 2003 or 4.
It had to
early
have been somewhere
2000.
around there.
That was their last
album.
album.
It still stands up too.
100%. Production's great. Music's great.
It could have
it's not
came out
dated.
like 3 years ago.
100%. But they still play shows. They've never broken up. But they sometimes play shows with Bruce. They play shows with either vocalist at times.
Huh.
They just believe it or not, it's hard to make it in the music business, right? And make it be your full-time gig. So
Is it?
I think they've just they pick and choose and just do the gigs that they need to do.
Yeah.
But and then All Out War, Condemned to Suffer, to me, like
Awesome.
for those ones, Crucified is their first album, which I don't know which one's my favorite, but both are really good. But I think if you're a metal guy and you listen to Condemned to Suffer, and you can even be like a death metal guy, you can
For sure.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Condemned to Suffer is very metal. And so put that on. It's evil. It's metal. It's got the Slayer riffs. It's got the trem pick riffs. It's got the double bass. It just happens to have some heavy thrash, heavy parts like that in there. And it's definitely, at the end of the day, All Out War. They're a hardcore band. There's no denying it. But I think if you're a metal guy and you listen to that, you're going to dig it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Jeremy, carry us over into the 21st century with all of this now that we've got the crossover introduced and the bands that are steering into metal. What in the last 24, 25 years here is hardcore relevant to the show here? Like, what are the bands that take us into this century?
So I mean that for sure is going to get us into metalcore, right? I mean, I think it's been called different names. New wave of American heavy metal was thrown in there at one point.
Sure.
True.
But at the end of the day, all those bands to me are under that umbrella of metalcore, no matter if they want to be or not.
Okay.
Just like, new metal bands in that era, like whether you want to be or not, you're new metal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Fear Factory will always be connected with the title new metal, even if it doesn't make
100%.
sense.
Or
And these bands-
Sepultura or
Yeah.
Stained even on the other side. You're like, that's new metal? Like,
Yeah.
that's,
right.
Like a Seven Dust new metal. Like,
yeah.
But metalcore, like these bands, metalcore, I think has that, it's almost like a slur, like, oh, I don't want to be called metalcore. Like, that's the worst thing you can call me. And I do think that it's misused. I think, like, when we call a band emo, emo is the most
Or screamo.
worst used
Yeah.
title because
Yeah.
that's not emo. Like, most of the things that people would call emo are not emo.
Yeah.
And metalcore, but it's all the blurring of lines. It's like everything just becomes harder and harder to differentiate. You can't just sit. Metalcore to me is where that becomes like, I don't know, are they metal or hardcore? I don't know anymore. So to me, and then that's the other thing. Breakdowns do not mean it's hardcore, right? If you listen to Black Flag, there's no breakdowns. That's not a thing in
Correct.
the root of hardcore.
Sure.
So a breakdown is not making something hardcore. If I listen to, you brought up Shadow of Intent, they have breakdowns,
Right.
but like that's, when I hear that, I don't think even a little bit of hardcore.
Yeah, I don't even think deathcore because you start thinking of that. Like, then what's the next step? But I don't even consider them deathcore. I don't know. But
Exactly. It's like,
The lines
so,
definitely start to blur. even
let me
more.
ask
Go
something
ahead.
because this is one of the things that I wanted to get across. So, where did the breakdown show up? Why is it all of a sudden related to all these bands? Why is it so prevalent now? Because you say metalcore and then you're talking about breakdowns, or you say deathcore. I know we'll get there in a second too. We'll start talking about that, but you said it's not. So why is it attached to hardcore and the breakdown? Is it because of the metallic hardcore bands like Hatebreed and shit that really started being the ones to bring that breakdown in? I mean,
That's
because
what I
it
think.
became popular at this time, this like MySpace internet age.
well, calling
that
it a
started
breakdown,
yeah.
right? Like, I don't think
Right.
I'd ever heard it called a breakdown prior to like that wave of metalcore and like things like that.
True.
Because
Just
even
a
Hatebreed,
groove.
like when Satisfaction came out, like there's chug breakdowns. I don't think anyone called it a chug. They called it the heavy part, like all
Yeah.
that heavy part. or that heavy groove.
Sure.
I mean, I said before we started filming, I mean, Effigy from Suffocation has Legion of Veracity, their first song on that, 91. There's a breakdown in that song. Did you call it a breakdown when you heard it? Did you, that breakdown?
No, we just called them grooves.
The grooves or that heavy part of the slam part. I mean, you talk about slam. Like, it's been there. And so to me, it's like, I would argue that breakdown in Liege is more of a true what people call breakdowns than any of the things these bands that we've been talking about do. And so to me, I think I could make a case that metal created breakdowns just as much as hardcore did.
Yeah.
I just think that the breakdown just evolved from groove.
Yeah.
And then, well, how do we make this heavier? How do we make this more piss? How do we make, it is about crowd participation in hardcore. So we can't just have it be like a mid-paced groove. How do we get it? Like, we want the walls destroyed.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Yeah.
Right.
It's just the evolution, I think, and then it kind of gets like pin the tail on the donkey, right?
Exactly.
That fits. Hardcore is the reason why we're doing these breakdowns. I even said it on the show when we talked about deathcore. That's where it's synonymous to, is the actual hardcore part of the core of deathcore. That's where the breakdown is. But then that doesn't even make sense, because if hardcore isn't adjacent to breakdowns, then what the fuck is deathcore? Because then it's just death metal with groove.
There's next to no hardcore parts in deathcore. It would amount to.
I just found that some guy named Tom Moulton invented the term breakdown in the early 70s to lend its term to disco, or it being the dance part.
Oh,
Breakdown.
The groove.
The groove.
Yeah.
So basically, I guess the hardcore dance part is kind of where it was taken from or derived from. So
I mean, like I said,
I didn't know that until just now.
During the time, I remember I would just call it like the heavy interlude.
Right.
Sure.
Like, that's to me what it was, but it's a breakdown, right? So
I feel like the lyrics of the song Indians by Anthrax states breakdown when he goes into the war dance part. I feel like as you're reading the lyrics, it'll say like breakdown, because they would list everything like.
But that part's the dance part. That's
yeah,
the
exactly.
Part. That's the part where you're like
war dance, and they slow everything way down. The tempo drops, or the beat is halftime feel, or whatever.
that's Anthrax in the '80s.
Yeah.
And so it's
so,
like,
I guess for metalcore that would translate to the dance part.
Yeah, for sure.
The breakdown.
And I think a lot of that is like metalcore is, I think, where it became the most mainstream it had ever been.
True.
And I think metalcore really is more rooted in the hardcore scene, and it's a lot of like dudes that were in hardcore bands or hardcore musicians. When we were talking about this episode, when you think of Killswitch Engage or Shadows Fall, they were in bands like Overcast, and so it's kind of coming from that hardcore foundation.
Okay.
And but we just happen to love metal. We're really into metal, and
they were like hardcore dudes that were like, I want to play some fucking metal.
Yeah, or I've always liked metal, but it just happens to be my
yeah.
scene or where I'm at. Like, we just played hardcore, but I can play more than that. I can do more than that. I want to do more.
I like more than that.
Yeah, I like more than that. And so let's expand on this a little bit. Or there's a big opening here for metal. Like, where the hell's all the metal gone?
Yeah. I feel like from the guests we've had on the show, that's been a personal tale of a lot of people. They'd come up on punk or hardcore, and then as their listening taste progressed and as they picked up their instrument, then they started to gravitate more toward metal. And then the case can be just the same, the opposite, where you start with metal, and that's your beginning of your journey, and then you discover punk and hardcore after that, and then you grab the guitar and like, well, maybe I'm not that good, or maybe this is a good place to start playing. I'm going to start playing punk and hardcore music. So I think the shoe fits either way. Mm-hmm. Anybody's journey can start either with punk or metal, and then they kind of find these things later. They'll find the other genre later, and then they'll try to emulate that in their play style.
For sure. But I also think metalcore is where we start. Like I said, all the lines are so blurred at this point.
Yeah.
And just for full disclosure, like, I don't even have much content or information on like when we get to deathcore, because to me at that point, there's no resemblance to hardcore in the sense of what like makes sense to even be able to talk to or speak to.
Yeah.
But when you like the prior lists of bands, I would say are very similar. They're not that different. I mean, like Strife is different than 100 Demons. but like they're all in the same camp. You could see almost like, oh, that could be a music festival. That could be a music festival. Metalcore, I mean, sure, it could be a music festival. You can make anything a fest, but these bands are very different.
Very.
There's not a lot
across the list. They're very different.
And I mean, there's bands I even left off here, you know, because you could consider like Norma Jean a metalcore band, but it's like I didn't get into the weeds with that. But yeah, I think when I think of bands like Converge, Dillinger Escape Plan, Coalesce, Botch, Dead Guy, Overcast not as well known, but I think Overcast being from the early 90s, kind of I have to include them. But that's where, to me, metalcore starts.
Okay.
Is there any? I mean, I know Luke that
I
would
agree.
say you know a lot. Maybe
Definitely
more
a
than
lot
I
of
do about
Poison the
this.
Well. Every Time I Die, all of that. That's like when I really started to get into the genre more and more. As far as like exploring different genres, the Acacia Strain for sure.
But both chaotic. I would say that like the interesting thing to me is the hardcore element in a lot of this is like the chaotic element.
True. I mean the Converge, Dillinger, Coalesce, Botch, Dead Guy,
Like
all of that
mathcore.
is very chaotic.
Every Time I Die at times early
For
on.
sure.
Like hyper
On Broken Wings. All over the place.
Those like dissonant, like wheat chords. You know, when you think of a band, you know, like Poison the Well.
Oh yeah, the dissonant chords.
Like, you know, all of that kind of comes in. Zayo, use that a
For
lot.
sure. Yeah.
You know, I think that is here, and that to me would be a hardcore element. But I think part of the problem too is looking at this stuff in an isolated sense. We're missing context because we are missing the entire like true emo, like plays a big role in this, and other subgenres of hardcore play a big role in this. You know, because when you look at a band like Poison the Well, their chaotic parts. That chaotic part is not influenced by Napalm Death chaotic. It's influenced more by, I think, the like punk hardcore bands that had been kind of developing and growing over the years and were more underground or whatever.
Okay.
It's more that than it is that they're like, man, I really love Napalm Death and how chaotic and grindcore and all this. It was more like, no, there's emo bands that do these things and we're just gonna make it more heavy or more extreme. And I think that's sort of, like I said, it's problematic maybe to look at it in such a focused way because we're missing a lot of the, you know, you miss the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're really, so that's what I'm trying to say. This is not an end all be all. It's just simply to help maybe connect that bridge between the metal and hardcore worlds.
Sure.
But Killswitch Engage, you know, they're a metalcore band and they definitely have elements. Like there are like two-step parts.
Yep.
Two-step, you know, just being
very rarely, but yeah.
But it's there.
For sure.
They have maybe some grit. They have like some of the ethos shows up in lyrics.
Yep, for
It
sure.
shows up in like it's very personal. It's very real. It's very relatable. It's
It
not
is.
fantastical even a little bit.
Right.
It's just real shit.
They do have like some breakdowns or grooves or really heavy
For sure.
dance parts.
That's where
Yeah.
it comes in more.
You know.
Yep.
Right? They like their breakdowns, like that's where it's like, oh, that's where the hardcore shows up.
It's also like we talked about before, just to reiterate, where they came up and who else they were playing with.
For sure.
Exactly.
Me and the homies, maybe not just homie, because like we're all homies, but we don't play in the same band. It's been that way. I mean, we have, you know, but
Yeah.
it's been that way. So it's like, what are the homies playing? We're all playing this shit, you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
or a version of this type of thing.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I think that's a big part of it. As far as I mean, Unearth, I would put them in a very similar category.
Yeah.
Unearth, I'd say,
Yeah.
are a little more
Definitely.
hardcore leaning
Yeah.
than a Killswitch Engage.
Then Killswitch, yeah, for
but
sure.
but still very
But they're
similar.
also more shreddy than Killswitch.
They are.
That's what's weird.
Yeah,
they have all
they're-
these solos and sweep picking and
Yep.
all that, and you'd
Way
barely
more
ever find any
BPM
of that
too.
Killswitch.
yeah.
But you know, but they brought it together with like over a breakdown. They're over
True.
here sweeping.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
You know,
yeah.
and like so. But like I said, everything just gets more blurred in this era.
Yeah.
It's
Agreed.
not as clear. It's like, well, are they more punk? Is that band hard? You know, whatever it is.
You know, Unearth's a great example of a crossover type of band because that vocalist is right there. Like you don't know if he's hardcore with the yelling, or if he's metal with like a fry vocal.
With like a growl.
Yeah, and then they've also got like a lot of the beats almost lend themselves to like a punk. Just
Yeah.
you know, like that the verses that they might go into before they get to those breakdowns. Like
Yeah.
that's almost a punk
Yeah,
feel
or
to me.
D-beats
Yep.
or whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
well, and that's actually it's. You said the word crossover, and I guess when I think about it, I'm like, I would say that's probably a good way to look at like an Unearth or a Killswitch is like they're just that era's crossover because it's kind of like when you look at Suicidal Tendencies. Like, are they that different from Anthrax?
Right.
They are, but like not really. Like
Yeah.
people, somebody that's very favorite band could be Anthrax. Number 2 could be Suicidal Tendencies.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and I
Yeah.
think this
Same
era,
with Unearth and Killswitch.
like
Sure.
it's like, okay, like that's crossover. Like they're different, but it's like you can see where that influence overlaps and where it comes into play, but it's not as obvious or pronounced. And I think that's kind of where we get in this era because Dillinger Escape Plan and Killswitch Engage are like
Two
not
polar opposites.
similar at all,
Yeah.
especially if you
right.
think about like first album compared to first album.
Yeah.
Like not the same at all.
No.
Right.
But they
It's apples and spaghetti.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now I want spaghetti with apples in it.
Mm.
But like Zayo's a band that to me I always viewed him as a hardcore band. But when Luke and I talked about this, it's like we could probably not disagree more on that.
When I first heard them, I thought there was a metal band.
But to me, I think it was a presumption. It was like, well,
I
what
also
kids
had
like them?
no idea they were Christian when I heard them. I thought it was evil as shit sounding, and then
Mhm.
someone was like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, that's a Christian band." I think it
Mhm.
was you actually.
Yeah, probably.
Jay was like, I won't listen.
Yeah,
to
we
it.
got to suss that out.
Yeah, I sussed that out real quick.
I gotta know.
I'm like, I need to know if I'm being subliminally influenced in any fucking way or not.
He's like, hell no. But yeah,
Hell to
18
the
Visions. But like, that's the thing. Like, if I rattled off these bands, right? Killswitch Engage, Zayo, 18 Visions, Every Time I Die, Poison the Well, On Broken Wings, you know. But then mentioning bands like Converge and Dylan. I mean, these bands are all very different.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of overlap, but I think definitely there's like a chaotic element, which I think comes from hardcore.
Right.
I think when you listen to bands like Kolask, Botch, they kind of set that ground for saying, okay, we are hardcore dudes, you know, but let's be technical a little bit.
and let's play whatever the hell we want.
Yeah.
I would also like to. I do want to say something real quick, and I don't want to drag this on like forever. But if you really think about like Converge, Dillinger, Coalesce, those kind of bands, like you can say, yeah, they're metalcore, but almost when you listen to it, they do have some of the shred in the elements of metal.
For sure.
But it's almost like skipping that hardcore and going almost back to punk rock. Like they have a very punk rock feel where it's like, yeah, Dillinger's technical as fuck, but it's like just this noisy, intense,
Punk mindset.
wild,
very
crazy.
chromatic.
Yeah,
It's
so
not in a key necessarily.
yeah,
or
so it's almost like punk core at times.
I agree
because
with
you
that.
could say that Dillinger isn't out there preaching what they preach. Like we talked about the earlier hardcore stuff kind of had that message where they might have their own message, but they just go out there and let's play this jazzy, weird punk influenced fucking noise, technical, whatever.
Yeah, but even if Dillinger did have a message, if you go to see them, I doubt you're gonna get that.
Yeah, you're not going to
message.
get that.
Right.
And it's there's people that are diehard fans that would sing along with Dillinger much more in the Greg days too, because he started putting hooks in and stuff. But
Yeah.
Yes.
like you might go there to spin kick or do flips or whatever, but you're not really singing along with him going like all them crazy vocal
So
patterns and
chaotic.
shit. You know,
Exactly.
maybe here or there might be the spots, but it still takes away from what we had already established with that hardcore feeling. You know, so
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that about that because it's a very punk rock attitude.
Very.
All of those bands Converge. Let's just be kind of metal but noisy and all over the place at times, but
Mhm.
also they go fucking insane on stage and
Yeah.
backflips and
Yeah.
destroy shit
Yeah.
and whatever.
Fun fact: I've been listening to Converge for over 2 decades. I don't know very many lyrics.
See,
I don't think there are many lyrics. They just repeat some stuff, but
No,
There's lyrics.
there's like I'd say Jacob Band is one of the best lyricists.
oh, for sure.
of all time.
Okay.
But it's not like a band I really like sing along to.
Right.
You know what
It's
I mean?
more like the full.
yeah, it's
production.
the whole package.
listening experience. Jeremy, would it be fair to say that, you got this list of bands right here that we're on currently, that they kind of pick and choose different parts of the hardcore that they infuse with their sound? That's why this list of bands is different from one to the next in terms of sound. They have those elements, but one band to the next, it would be a different element that they're choosing to
I
infuse
agree
in
with
their
that.
band.
Well, I think the menu is bigger, right? I think at this point, when we're talking about the 2000s, there's so many subgenres now that have formed. Whereas we're talking about like if you're talking about Agnostic Front or you're talking about Suicidal Tendencies, like what is the menu to pull from?
Sure.
Like, those bands in the 80s couldn't be like, well, let's listen to some grindcore.
Right.
Or let's listen to some brutal death.
Yeah.
All these bands that we're talking about here in this metalcore,
Yeah.
they were listening to Integrity. They were listening to Cro-Mags. They were listening to Metallica and Slayer. They were listening to Napalm Death.
Yeah.
They were listening to whatever bands, slam bands, death metal bands, grind bands, all of it. So it's just you're throwing way more into the melting pot.
Makes sense.
But to me, these bands are definitely hardcore band. Like if you ask them, they would be more like, well, we're hardcore bands. We're hardcore dudes. That's what we're into.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, they're unifying. And I think to your point about Dillinger, it's kind of interesting you say jazz, because to me, jazz is about expression, right? It's not about rules as much as it's about expression. Like we're going to go out, we're not going to have a mode. We're going to play off notes sometimes.
Chromatic,
we're going to be a little chromatic sometimes and be a little chaotic sounding.
Yeah.
I think, but it's expressive. And like we started at the top of the podcast, hardcore is very about expressive and being and I think when you think about a Dillinger, that's what it was. It's like those dudes can rip, they can shred. If I wanted them to, we could sit down and be like, hey, let's talk about, let's teach them some keys and some modes, and they could play whatever you need them to play.
Right.
But that's not what, like, that wasn't what they were trying to express. They wanted to express like chaos and frustration and anger and rage, and they did it through shredding.
Yeah.
But it sounded different in other bands. Converge. Kurt Ballou is maybe the most expressive guitar player of all time, in my opinion, with what he does.
One of the most original guitar players, I think.
For sure.
And I just want to say this just for context, in case people haven't listened to the older versions of our subgenre episodes, that I will stand on this hill. For one, we're getting into the internet era where it's getting easier to access things, so we're getting to pull from that menu, like you said, out of all these different things a lot easier than hopefully Nick trades me some Napalm Death and I really love it, so I can start using that in my influence of music. No, now I can just dial shit up. Oh, I heard about this band 18 Visions, and now I can just kind of dial it up and hear something or hear a snippet or go to their MySpace. And so now we're starting to have a bigger menu to pull from easier, right? And at this time, we're getting out of like the main metal dying, going into this new metal shit, and then Slipknot comes and catapults heavy music to a stage that we've never seen before. To me, paving the way for bands like Hatebreed, who paved the way for bands like a lot of these other bands that heard a Hatebreed and like, oh, I want to kind of do something like that. Because to me, it kind of, when you're talking about this crossover type thing, to me, it always just kind of really goes back to that Hatebreed, where as far as popularity and the most people getting influenced by it, that's where they stand to me. Hatebreed at least does.
For sure.
And that was paved the way, like I said before, from Slipknot gaining popularity for heavy music again, taking that new metal and almost like putting a heart right in the dagger right in the heart, right? Especially when they came out with Iowa, because they were totally like, fuck this, we're on this commercial thing, let's play grind and get even heavier. Now, I don't want to speak on anything else after that, but you can't not say that their popularity and the way that they brought heavy metal more back into the mainstream paved a way for a band like Killswitch to be as big as they are now. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong about that, but
no, I think you're right.
I do think you're right.
The internet explosion and the explosion of Slipknot making metal more accessible, and then saying fuck you and becoming real heavy. And then people were like, oh shit, Slipknot gets this heavy? Oh man, I just listened to On Broken Wings. That kind of sounds like Slipknot. And you're like, no, that's the other way around. But anyway, you got to get in.
Potato.
Anyway, you got to get in. We talk about this a lot too, is like the breakthrough bands, whatever that has to be for you, whether it's Nickelback or Five Fungered
Dingle Punch.
Yeah, Five Fungered Dunk Punch. But
Dunk Punch.
But you know what I mean? Get in however you got to get in. That's all I'm saying.
Agreed.
So.
Agreed. And a lot of people, like, even like, I mean, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit, but I'll say like a Knocked Loose, looked at the blueprint that Hatebreed laid out, and they were like, oh, I think we can do that too. And now look at that.
Well, you actually just kind of blew my mind, honestly, with that connection, because when you look at the 80s, what was huge in the 80s? Like thrash started becoming huge, right? Like that was a thing, like Anthrax, Megadeth, Metallica, Slayer, huge. So hardcore bands, maybe hardcore's not as big. It's a new thing. It's just starting. It's like, well, shit, like we do rely on energy. We can't play in front of 20 people.
Yeah.
So, expand or die, right? Like, oh
Right.
shit, like, man, if we just play, if we could appeal a little bit, if we're into that, that's what we're listening to anyway. We're listening to the thrash metal.
Yeah.
If we can expand in that direction a little bit, we're gonna have our shows packed out.
Yeah.
People are gonna be going crazy with
Right.
this shit.
Yep.
And then in the '90s, there's a lull. Like, no one gives a fuck about heavy music, period.
Yeah.
And so it is really just there's underground, there's death metal underground, and there's a hardcore underground. That's really it. There's really no metal to speak
Right,
of outside
yeah.
of, like, you know,
They fall-
Panteras and
Metallica,
you know, the big
guys.
bands.
Mhm.
And then new metal comes on, but no one's really wanting to aspire to be new metal. Like, I mean, as much as it was big, nobody was like, oh shit, like, because there's too much of a difference there. You know, you're not having death metal bands being new metal, but then Slipknot kind of bring it all. Like, they're like, no, we're gonna do this with credibility. We're gonna be legitimate. We're not just some kitschy Limp Bizkit type of thing. Like,
Right.
we're fucking legitimate.
Right.
And so that's why I think without Slipknot, there's no metalcore. There is no, like,
Probably not.
there is no, like, these hardcore bands don't, it's just like the crossover bands in the 80s. These bands, I think, like I said, when you blew my mind, I'm like, that's why these bands are all rooted in hardcore, because they're hardcore dudes, but then they see, and they like metal, they're fine with metal.
Yeah.
Slipknot get big and they're like, fuck.
Yeah.
Maybe if we can, you know, let's expand horizons a little bit. And we're going to have packed out shows with all this energy and shit's going to be cool. And we're not sellouts. We're not playing
Yeah,
corny
yeah.
shit that we don't like.
Yeah.
We fucking like Slipknot. We
And-
like Immolation.
Yeah.
We like Napalm Death.
Yeah, I
and
think
s-
for somebody to come out and do heavy music the way that Slipknot did, it enabled a lot of people to say, we can do this little pocket of music that we like in hardcore, but also infuse the other things that we like as well, which are more hard rock or even metal oriented. You know, you got your
Correct.
choruses, but you've also got your shred. So they started to incorporate all of these things and then just put it into, like, this is what our band's going to sound like. I don't want to do just one style. I want to do like 3-4 styles that I like all into one band and make it a cohesive thing. And that's where you get an explosion of metalcore, like right hot on the heels of Slipknot kind of putting a dagger in the new metal genre, or picking up with Korn and new metal and then running with it, like steering back away from
Yes.
what Korn was like heavy to start, and then they kind of went way commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Like by the time you get to that third album, I'm dipping out.
Yeah.
Like, I gotta go. I can't do.
It's very cookie cutter at
Yep.
that time. It's like
Yep.
we know what works, we know what's selling. You know, we got a
Yep.
big producer.
But
that,
Well, it's the
you
other
know,
direction, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
were a metal band
Yeah.
or whatever, but then it was like,
Yep.
well, we want to get, like, at that time, it's like, well, the only thing that's selling is pop and rap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to become more pop and rap
Yep.
to
sell
to
records.
make a career of
Yeah.
this.
Yep.
So bands, I mean,
All
evolve
that,
or die. So
Yeah.
And that's when I'm talking about Slipknot. Think about all the different genres that they put into their music, but they made almost new metal cool to metal guys because they're like, maybe I can deal with a little bit of that kind of jumpy hip hoppy rap stuff because he's rapping like kind of heavy.
and there was
and
a
he's
blast right
singing-
before it.
Yeah, and he's singing a little bit, and then they like Slipknot's got some breakdowns.
Yep.
And
They
motherfuckers got
do.
some
Oh, yeah.
grooves where you're like,
Yep.
fuck yeah, especially on the first couple of albums. So it's like they, to Modd's point, they just took it and turned it in the other direction. They
Yeah.
just said, well, we'll take what's popular and we'll have enough of it in there that we can get all the mainstream kids that are really into this into it. But then
Yeah.
maybe we can steer them and then they
Like-
then look at all the bands when they got popular who they took on tour though.
Yep.
Killswitch, like Slayer was opening for them. Like so
Yeah.
some kid that loves new metal or spit it out and only heard that and then they go and Slayer's opening for them, they're like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Mhm.
so
Yeah, like somebody-
I
Or
just
Ozfest, like kids going to
Right.
Ozfest
Yeah.
or whatever, and then
Yeah.
all these bands that are on Ozfest are like, I remember Slipknot, you know, they played with Hatebreed, they played
Yep.
with God Forbid, they played with these bands, and I think definitely, I mean, yeah, but Slipknot just went the other way, right? They
Yeah.
were like, well, here's all this shit that's like, it's cool, but let's make it like legit, and like we're not gonna ignore the fact that we love death metal and all this other shit.
Yeah.
Like let's make it legitimate. Let's make it extreme. Like, yeah, some of that shit's cool. Like rapping's not bad. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
They and in many ways, Slipknot are a standalone band, right? But they could have very easily been called a metalcore band.
Sure.
I mean, they
Yeah.
brought all those features
Back-
together.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like, but they're not because they're kind of one of those, like, they're not in a genre. They're Slipknot.
yeah.
I
They
think
do it their way.
one of the things that epitomizes like how Slipknot swung the gate back toward heavy is you'd have a song like Wait and Bleed on the radio nonstop,
Yeah.
but then some kid goes out and buys that CD and the first thing they hear is Sick. They probably weren't expecting that. They were probably expecting a little bit more Wait and Bleed
Yeah.
and not something as heavy as Sick or Eyeless where
Well,
hit me in my
exactly.
brain, look me in my brand new eye.
Yeah.
Like that fucking that crushes. Like that
So
is
pissed.
way heavier.
Borderline grindcore.
Yeah.
At
Yeah,
times.
it's just
like it's insane.
Yeah, and they could have gone from Wait and Bleed to
Linkin Park.
like Power Man 5000 or something like that. It could have gone the other way entirely. But you can't go on stage, 9 guys in jumpsuits and masks and sing like pop rock
like Linkin Park.
You can't really pull that off very well. So
unless you're Kiss.
Yeah.
Not 9 guys, but they're dressed up and they're singing something.
Unholy.
But Slipknot definitely did that. I know that we just got to beat that drum until this show doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But
Metal Maniacs.
I mean, I'm not the biggest Slipknot fan.
I'm not either.
I mean, that's
not
the thing I don't want to
either.
misconstrue here.
I
Is
love
like
Slipknot.
it just has the effect is real. I feel like, and it has to be addressed. And I don't know who was doing metal at that time bigger and better than they were. Like I remember waiting on
no one.
Yeah, I remember waiting on a Pantera album, Reinventing the Steel, and then being severely disappointed in that because it wasn't what I had expected from Pantera. I felt like it was almost kind of mailed in. Like this is not. I like Goddamn Electric. I was like, that's a cool song.
I mean, Slipknot feels more like the evolution from Great Southern Trendkill
Yeah,
than Reinventing the Steel.
Sure.
I would say.
yeah,
And I would agree with you. I think at that point, Pantera was my favorite band in the whole fucking universe.
yeah. They were carrying the flag for me, and I felt like all the big four had let me down, one after
But
the other in
Pantera-
turn. Yeah, and then Pantera was carrying the flag, but then they dropped Reinventing the Steel, and I'm like, that was a miss for me.
They
And so
were squeezing that out too, man. I mean, with all that shit with
Phil.
and
Dysfunction in the
everything,
band.
it
Yeah.
was kind of like they're lucky we even got that
Yeah,
album. To be
yeah.
honest, at that time
And
with
it's
all
not-
them issues, and
It's
stuff,
not bad,
so
but it's just not like what I had hoped for. And then you wait maybe another 2 years, I think, and then you get the Slipknot album, and I'm like, finally, we've arrived. Metal is back again in a way that's real. I mean, yeah, the costumes are gimmicky, but I felt like the music was real. I was like, holy shit, there's some real sick vitriol in this band. Like, they
Yeah.
are absolutely pissed off.
it was a perfect storm,
Yeah.
especially at that time in life because
We
I
needed
was
it.
pissed off. So.
Yeah, we really needed that album at that time.
But let's move on here because we're starting to run out of time a little bit. I don't want to carry this on all day,
Just
But
want to give a couple shout outs real
Yeah.
quick to a couple albums that
Please.
people should be checking out.
please.
So I think for sure a band that I still need to dig into more, but I think Zayo, Where Fire and Blood Bring Rest.
Okay.
I mean, I know you're a Zayo guy a little more than me. Is there any other album that you think a metal guy would
I'm
be like?
opposite. I'm not really that big of a Zayo guy.
Oh,
we
I-
talked at coffee about
Oh, that's
that.
right. You said okay, never mind. So maybe you're not. I'm not.
I've seen them a couple times and I enjoy it, but I've never really
Gotten
been-
into 'em.
No,
okay.
not too much.
I would say like Converge, Axe to Fall. Like-
Axe to Fall would be a good
like for
album.
metal.
Yeah, especially for this. Jane Doe would be a little bit too experimentation.
Like too chaotic.
Yeah, a little
Yeah,
bit.
that's all over the place, Jane
It
Doe.
really is.
Yeah.
Axe to Fall is a good album. You picked a good one.
Like I said, it's weird because there's so many range in here, but I thought to me like the Red Chord Clients, like
Sick album.
it's
It
weird
is a
because it's
really
like they're
good album.
I would almost argue like that's very. I mean, it's very death metal.
Yeah, it's
It is.
steamroller.
But if
dude.
you
Yeah.
listen to it, it's like
It's intense.
you can hear like I mean, there's D beats. There's hardcore drum beats.
weird chords, all that discord and
like-
dissonance and shit in there.
And-
yeah.
So that, but like I said, it's tough because like if you listen to Red Chord Clients, you could love that, and then listen to still a lot of hardcore and be like, I hate that shit.
Yeah.
Sure.
But that it is what it is. And then
Very
the band
metal album.
Animosity, they had an album Empires, which to me is in my mind a really good representation of this era. And if you're a metal dude that's never really gotten into hardcore and you listen to that, it's like there's hardcore elements,
There really is.
but I think you'd find yourself being like, I love this band, I love this album. And
I love that album too. Is that that's the one with the black page, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the green one with the guy falling into the pavement on the cover. Is there anything are there any other albums in this time period that you think Luke would maybe bridge the gap in hardcore and metal?
Maybe Hope Conspiracy, Cold Blue, or like End Note.
I could see that. I guess see when I think HopeCon, I think they're a hardcore band.
Right. But it is a little bit more metal. Like at the time that I heard
'Cause it had an
Hope
edge to
Conspiracy,
it.
I was more of a metal dude, and that one really kind of grabbed me and pulled me in.
You're right. Yes, check out HopeCon. You won't. I mean, you can't go wrong with HopeCon.
They
but yeah,
just
Hope
came.
Conspiracy.
They just came back.
Oh yeah.
The singer broke my nose once.
And then, and then before we get into you have some current recommendations, and we'll
For
go over
sure.
this last little part here. I do want to just say I do want to bring this band up, and we've talked about them multiple times on the show. But the Acacia Strain, you have proto deathcore on here.
Same thing with the Red Chord. I feel like both those bands to me are like proto deathcore.
It's just weird because they're so extremely the same, but so extremely different.
But to me, I feel like, well, and the Red Chord are actually identified it like if you look online or wherever it is, they're defined as a deathcore band. Like that's what the Red Chord are defined as.
Yeah.
And I
could
think
see that.
I think Acacia Strain have the same. If you look online, if you look in like the subgenre categories, Acacia Strain are oftentimes lumped in as deathcore.
Yeah.
I think the thing that makes them distinctly different, in my opinion, is the Red Chord. A lot of grind there.
A lot of grind.
And then the Acacia Strain, I'm not as familiar, but I feel like that's more of a breakdown type of band.
Lots of
Sludge.
chug.
Yeah, lots of
mosh.
slow. And then Red Chord is way more chaotic.
Way more
but-
technical,
Yeah.
way more.
And the Acacia Strain has all those sing-along parts.
True.
Yeah.
All those very direct vocal patterns
Mhm.
that mean something. Every vocal has a direction and it's there for purpose. It's not there because I have to put vocals on this.
Mhm.
It's there because
He hates a mirror.
I need something from the audience.
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
You're approaching music like that.
See, I'd say
you know?
the Red Chord have that too. I'd say, like
You think so?
especially, I think especially like clients, but then moving into, when you get into Pray for Eyes, when you get into Fed Through the Teeth Machine. First off, there's a lot of lulls in the vocals. He's not screaming or singing over everything. There's a lot of spaces, but also,
Jay loves that.
there's a lot. That's what I'm getting at. But also, I think there's a lot more sludge and groove. I mean, I
Yeah.
think just as they progress as a band, if you listen to Fed Through the Teeth Machine, it's like there's a lot of sludge on there. There's a lot of, it's not all chaotic and fast. It's,
I don't
More
think I've
groove.
listened to either of those albums.
oh, they're great albums, great albums. But you can see it in Clients even. I think Clients, you see those elements of like, oh, there's a little slow part there. But definitely, and like I said, deathcore, nothing against deathcore. I just think that you start to lose any resemblance or connection to hardcore. Like, to me, deathcore bands, I think deathcore's just like metalcore. It's a terrible name for a genre.
Bit of a
It's
misnomer.
a mislabel.
Yeah.
It's just, at the end of the day, I would say deathcore, they're metal bands. Those
Yeah.
are metal bands.
Yeah.
For sure.
They could hate everything. Like, I think you'd find a lot of kids that like deathcore, bands in deathcore that are like, I don't fucking listen to hardcore.
Yeah,
I
because
fucking hate that shit.
Yeah, and it's weird. Deathcore is a weird label because a lot of times if people are like, "This is deathcore," I'm just like, "I'm good."
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's just my instant reaction.
Yeah.
It could be the coolest thing I've ever heard, but if
Right.
you're like, "Here's a new deathcore band," I'm just like, "I'm
Well,
good."
Amir is a deathcore band.
Really?
People
Right.
call Amir deathcore.
Yeah, it sounds like hardcore
Signs
to
of the
me,
Swarm are deathcore.
yeah, so it's weird.
Diartis Murder's death. I mean, it's
yeah,
like, what does that even mean? I mean, kind of like metalcore. What the fuck does metalcore mean?
I do get what you're saying though. Like deathcore, like dudes in deathcore bands and dudes in hardcore bands could not be further from each other.
100%.
The thing that
And they don't riff off of each other or draw
No.
influence or overlap on each other.
I think the reason you get this label of deathcore is because, and I think we said it at some point along the way in the last year, that deathcore was like musicians that weren't proficient enough to be technical death metal musicians, which I don't mean to sound insulting, but so a better way of saying it might be they had the spirit of metal when they picked up their instruments and they started playing, and it's not hardcore, right? But it's not as virtuoso as some
As
very
death
technical
metal.
death metal bands.
Yeah.
But they're still playing like very metal oriented rhythms, so
And there's groove.
yeah, and so
So
it's
it's
it's deathcore, and the reason we call it deathcore because the core of the songwriting comes from death metal, but they're not as over the top with the musicianship,
Mhm.
which isn't. I don't mean to say that as a slight, but it's just kind of like some guy picks up the guitar and he realizes, hey, I'm not Yngwie Malmsteen.
It's not about being super
Yeah.
technical.
Yeah,
It's more
it's-
about
yeah,
the
exactly. It's
groove or the,
groove
song.
or the,
I mean,
or
Whitechapel, those
the
dudes
breakdown, the dance part.
I mean,
Yeah.
That's
to
what
me,
it's about.
Whitechapel are top tier musicians. So it's not a slight on a band like Whitechapel.
Yeah,
And the line gets blurred now too because you got these people would call Shadow of Intent deathcore,
Yeah.
but stellar musicians in that band from every single one of
Yeah.
them is insanely badass.
What?
So it's just we start blurring a lot of lines.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
deathcore. I do like what you said about that though, bro. Like the core of the songwriting is death metal,
yeah,
so that makes sense.
yeah.
It's just these other elements that are in it that have been labeled are like, well, we're going to have a lot of breakdowns and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and that's a
Yeah.
lot of
and
times.
I think that stands for metalcore too, where it's a metal band at the core. It sounds like heavy metal from the 80s, but now it's just a more modern spin on it. We're adding more from the menu. There's more to
Yeah.
select from to add to our style of music. And same with deathcore. Like one of the bands I wanted to speak to is Fit for an Autopsy. They're almost moving into metalcore from deathcore just because they're adding more of the clean vocals, which I feel like is more of a heavy metal thing.
Yeah.
But if you go back to like some of their older work or whatever, very talented musicians. So I can't sit there and say that all deathcore bands are not talented musicians.
Right.
They just kind of write rhythms that are maybe not as technical. We're not always a technical metal band, but you've got one of the lead guitarists on there. He just shreds.
Yeah.
And he'll play guitar solos.
Is that Will Putney?
He
No,
doesn't shred.
no,
He
the other
he
guy.
writes a lot of the stuff, but
It's
he
the
is in
dude
that
with
band.
the super long braided beard
Yeah,
that
yeah,
he
yeah.
solos.
Say
and
he don't.
Well,
tour-
Thy Art is
tour with
Murder is
them.
very similar
Oh, he doesn't.
in that way, right?
Yeah.
Like, Thy Art is Murder, and like all these bands, like, but that's the thing. I think it just becomes a point where the lines are blurred so much. Like,
Yeah.
it's like they have elements of grindcore, they have elements of death metal, they have elements of hardcore. I mean, there's so many things that I mean, shit. We could have been talking about Between the Buried and Me with metalcore in a way, but it's like. It's so ranging. It's like, well, they have hardcore parts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
have
have-
every part of
They have
everything.
Pink Floyd
Every
parts.
music
Yep.
You know, it's
ever
like it's
known.
just the nature of the
Yeah.
beast, and
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's better. We're better for it. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
hear, Eaten Back to Life 1,000,000 times.
Right.
I want to grow on this shit. As much as I love Symbolic by Death, I don't want to hear you do it.
Right.
I've heard it done.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
take it as an influence, but like do something new.
Yeah.
Push
Yeah.
the boundaries a
You're-
little bit.
you're-
And I think that's where deathcore is. I mean, Shadow of Intent, they're a deathcore band. That's their genre. But it's like,
let me push that button.
but it's
No, I'm
like,
just kidding.
but
I'm just fucking
but it's
around.
like, but they like you said, Fit for an Autopsy. If they wanted to, they could write an album like Morbid Angel right now.
Yeah.
They could write that. They're talented enough to do
Sure.
it. They
Oh,
have the
yeah.
ability to do it. They have the
Yeah.
knowledge to do it.
Yeah.
That's not what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think it's great. I actually pivot a little bit. I wonder if we do either maybe a part 2 or we maybe dig in, like maybe we just make a playlist with current stuff. And I don't want to not get there,
Sure.
but I just for time's sake, I don't want to totally rush through it. But I think maybe we could talk about some stuff that maybe is on our mind currently,
Playlist.
like
Yeah.
some stuff that we like. But like for right now to wrap up, we can kind of talk about modern stuff that blurs those lines. But I
Sure.
think maybe for time's sake to dig in deeper, we can do something a little different with really getting into current
Yeah.
shit.
'Cause
Yeah,
we're already 2 hours in,
That's what I'm saying.
and that's kind of like
Yeah. I think we
peak
could do.
capacity of an episode. So we could always. I mean,
We
you
kind
guys
of
are
brought it.
welcome to come back.
We
in
brought it
anytime.
from 70s, 80s to current, and then we
Yeah.
could pick up and run with the current list of things that is
I'd be down with that.
going on.
The goal
Yeah.
was to be quick with the history, but
It's hard.
That's
It's hard
what
I
to
know
we
rush.
shut
said.
the fuck up.
It's hard
I
to
know
rush through
shut-
40, 50 years of like how we got to where we are now.
Yeah.
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 Well,
But-
what do you want to do? Do you want to blow through some of these and talk about them, or do we want to just have a part 2? I'm cool with whatever.
Maybe why don't we end with just maybe some more like just a couple off the top of our head
Yeah, give
recommendations
us
for
some
shit that we're listening to right
Shit
now,
that
like
that
current
you would
stuff
call hardcore.
that you're like, this is hardcore, but like
Carrying
Metal
the
Maniacs
torch.
folks should be like checking this out because it definitely blurs the lines.
Oh
Yeah.
man, for me, one of my absolute favorites of all time, Trapped Under Ice.
yeah,
100%.
and I can
Um,
fuck with that even too. So you already got that vouch from a metal guy right now.
Okay.
Because a lot of the times the hardcore doesn't speak to me, and it's just one of those things that's not for me. It's not
And
that
they're
I
very
don't dislike
hardcore.
it, but
Yeah.
they are. But I do like Trapped Under Ice.
Big Kiss Goodnight.
Yeah, Luke knows what to show me when he knows what I like. So he'll send me some stuff and be like, "Check this out," and I did listen to that. So, what else you got, fellas?
Another one, you've got it on here, Never Ending Game, Outcry. That's probably one of my favorite albums that's come out in the last couple of years. I listen to it literally daily. One of my favorite bands.
And that's straight up. I mean, that I'd almost say they're a crossover in a way because they've got
A little.
like
They've
some
got a lot of
solos.
metal, a lot of solo, a lot of leads.
kind of a suicidal tendencies vibe at times. They got some weird
Sometimes.
funky jams.
And it's Michigan hardcore.
Oh yeah,
That's cool.
Will from Grand Rapids.
yeah. Grand
awesome.
Haven.
Grand Haven?
Yeah, he
Oh,
lives in
wow.
Grand Rapids, but he's a Grand Haven guy.
Hell yeah.
Really? I
Nice.
didn't know
Yep.
that. That's
Yep,
even
Lakeshore,
closer to home.
baby. But yeah, so is there any other? So we got Never Ending Game,
Yeah.
Outcry. But I'd say if you listen to any of their catalog, there's
Anything, yeah.
there's definitely
Outcry's a good one though.
Yeah.
It's new.
Can I speak on a couple? And I'm just pulling off your list,
For sure.
just that I can
Yeah.
put out there.
Real
Quick, Knock Loose. Like if you don't know what's going on with Knock Loose and hardcore and metal right now, Knock Loose
asleep.
are the Pantera of our generation.
the pinnacle
right
of
now.
that.
Like that's what's happening. So
Yeah.
start there. dude gets a lot of flack for his vocals, but just hang in there because
I know.
like it goes back to that attitude thing and that fuck you thing. You know what I mean?
Put
Like,
on Knock Loose.
and there
Yeah.
are funny memes of his vocals. They're great.
I think
but,
it's funny he gets flat because I think he's one of the best vocalists of all time.
but they're
I think so,
badass.
too.
Like Knock Loose is awesome. They write great music. They're doing everything right. Year of the Knife, badass, like hardcore band right now.
They're
they,
back.
They verge almost close sometimes to death metal, just because
For
you know
sure.
they got dude from Sang with Sigalbog on their CD and shit like that. Like he sings on there, right, Luke?
Yep.
Yeah. So
Well,
it's like,
and a lot of those
Devin.
guys are in a straight up death metal band called Damnation's Domain too.
Okay.
They are, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like Maddie
So,
plays
Maddie
bass in
plays
that.
bass.
and then just one more of your list I want to speak on that I've become to really like is Harm's Way. Because I mean, the dude is a meme, the Running Man meme. You know what I mean?
just
He
did
is
it
a
again.
hardcore
Did you see it?
meme.
Did anyone see it?
But
No.
No.
I did not.
Harm's Way could be considered a hardcore band, but goddamn, they're metal as fucking. They're heavy as shit, dude. Like the vocalist, I think, is like the whole ethos of that hardcore thing, and just because they play a lot of hardcore. But if you listen to what those guys are playing on the guitar and the drums and everything, it's like metal as fuck. Like especially with the
is.
backing tracks
Well,
and
and they
some
started-
of the open shit that they have going on. It's very, very metal.
Well, they're
you
in
know?
Metal Blade,
Yeah.
and they started off as a power violence band,
Yeah.
and
way
they're
way
and,
different.
and,
They're,
and,
yeah,
and
older
they're
stuff.
largely a straight edge band. So I
Yeah.
mean, they have all that, like you said, the ethos and
Yeah.
all that going on.
Yeah.
I think for me, just if I had to give a shout out and just be like, hey, check this shit out, it blurs both things. And I would say even, and these are bands I even was like, are they blurring? Or are they just metal bands? But they're called a band called Shabalba from Los Angeles, heavy as fuck. If
Love
you
that
talk to
name.
those dudes, they'd probably say like, we're a hardcore band, like we're hardcore dudes.
And that's the one with the X,
Yep.
Shabalba.
Shabalba.
A lot of people say Zabalba. It is
Zabalba,
pronounced
yeah.
Shabalba.
Yeah.
And I'll just a little quick fun fact about Zabalba. Trapped Under Ice. The reason why they stopped writing heavy music was Justice Tripp said, "Why would I want to write heavy music when Zabalba exists?"
Exactly. It's one of the heaviest. I mean, they're
It literally is one of the heaviest bands I've ever heard.
if you like death metal, sludgy shit, things like that, I mean,
That's
Shabalba
your
will be
shit.
right up your alley. That's why I
Yep.
said I don't even know you'd call them a hardcore band, but they are definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, we've already said none of this makes sense anyway. It's like
Thanks
there's
for
blurred
listening for
lines.
2 hours. It didn't
But-
make no fucking sense.
But them, and then I would just say, because I do think we're gonna have some time to dig in more.
yeah, we will.
Yeah,
me-
we didn't even mention Terror, so
To
like,
me,
Yeah.
Nails.
we need a part 2. for
Yeah.
this.
Nails to me are a
Nails, for
band.
sure.
You know, they blur those lines a little bit, and they have like a foundation, like Todd Jones being, you know, the dude that was instrumental to Terror.
Carry On.
He, you know, all the band, the Carry On, Betrayed.
Dude has his hands in everything.
He does so
And-
many things, but Nails to me, I mean, if you ask Todd, Nails are metal. They're a metal band. They're
For
not
sure.
hardcore or anything. But
And you could listen to them and be like, this is like crushed grind punk too.
Yeah,
but
for
that
sure.
new Nails, holy fuck, it's awesome, dude.
it
It's
might be
so
their best
good.
shit they've ever done.
So-
which
Dude,
is
it's
hard
so
to
good. It's probably gonna be on my top 10. I'm
It-
getting close to the end of the year, and they haven't scooted off yet. So
but to me,
that's
I
how
would-
much I like that
It's a
album.
badass.
I would say the easiest transition point for the bands on this modern list, I would say Jabalba, Nails. I love Knocked Loose on there. I think I love, you know, everything from Trapped Under Ice. All that shit's great. But yeah, I think we might need to have a little bit more time and do
Well-
some more like current.
I've got a couple of band
Yeah.
names I want to bounce off
Ooh,
you
yeah.
guys. You can
Yeah.
tell me if you feel like this fits the show, or if you can
Hit me.
or maybe tell me like no, not quite. But a band that I get hardcore vibes from or influences from, Johnny Booth.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Yeah. I fucking love that band.
I've
Yeah.
never,
see
I've
that.
never heard them.
Okay,
Oh,
check those
they're
guys
good.
out. They're
Pretty
really good. Callous Cowboys.
Yeah, they're-
Mm,
to
They're
me,
a continuation of like the Dillinger.
Yeah,
thing
they're
for
like
sure.
Yeah,
I would say,
Dillinger.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would say as much as Dillinger is,
And
yes,
then-
they are.
Kubla Khan, Texas.
For sure.
100%.
Yeah,
And
for
they're
sure.
they're a band that would definitely be on the current modern
Yeah.
list.
And then
No
lastly, Body
No
Snatcher.
Cure, yeah.
Oh, Body Snatcher
Body
for
Snatcher.
sure. Yeah.
Body Snatcher, like
Yeah.
I'd say Body Snatcher are in that like
Deathcore?
deathcore world,
Yeah.
Yeah.
they blur the line.
But
for
when
sure.
I saw them,
more
for-
stripped down.
I saw them at Sonic Temple. I gave them some time, and I was
Oh,
just like,
sweet.
man, fucking breakdown after breakdown,
Yeah.
after breakdown. So that's what made me feel like core or
Pissed,
hardcore.
aggressive,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the point.
Yep.
Not a lot of frills.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I would agree with Body Snatcher in
Okay.
that way.
For
Like
sure.
they,
So
they lean that way.
those are bands that
No
I'm
Cure
aware of
for sure.
currently.
Yeah. fucking no Cure. But
dudes got
they're-
stabbed.
No
still
Cure's
play.
wild too, because at times you're like, is this death metal? What the fuck are these straight edge death metal guys? And then we definitely got to have a part 2 because we didn't talk about Maggot Stomp, which there's a whole bunch of hardcore dudes playing fucking death metal now. So like we definitely have to have a part 2.
Terror put an album out on Maggot Stomp.
Oh
didn't
no
they?
shit.
Terror?
Yeah.
No.
I have a Terror shirt and it literally says Maggot Stomp.
Well, because
And
they did a crossover thing for a second with a couple, but they didn't release anything on Maggot Stomp.
And then we also need to, and we're going to wrap this up here in just a second, but we also need to talk about Slam.
True.
If you're talking about hardcore and breakdowns, right?
So we're going to have a whole other 2-hour-long episode.
Yeah.
So tune in, you fucks.
Jeremy was just like, holy
Subscribe.
shit.
Yeah.
We're going to have a whole nother episode. It's going to have some beat down. We're going to talk about
So we went through the
Built
80s
Upon
and all that,
Frustration.
but yeah.
Some Slam.
With that being said, I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming on the show once
Thanks
again.
for having us.
Dude, I'd love to do this again, do more episodes like this. This is fun. This is a cool open conversation. Gives me a break a little bit too from doing a massive research. So I appreciate you guys' work, especially for coming on the show, doing all the work, taking the time out of your own time to not only come on here and do this, but also take the time. I know you guys met up and you were finishing up notes right before you came and stuff. I know you guys are busy, so I appreciate that. Modley, sweet child of mine, appreciate you being here today, buddy, as always. And with that being said, look out for part 2. It may not come like right after this like most part 2s do, but we got a lot more to talk about. So
the appendium, we'll call it the appendium.
Yeah,
Sweet.
we'll just have an ongoing discussion. So
All right.
Electric Boogaloo.
keep it metal.
Cool.
Peace.
Thanks, guys.
Later.
Hardcore Maniacs. Thank you so much for checking out the episode. Be sure to hit that like button and give us a share.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed our podcast today, please give it a rating on your streaming service to help us gain some exposure.
And if you really enjoyed the show, please give us a follow or hit that subscribe button and come hang out with us every week. And remember, keep it metal.